Good evening. I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board, and this is the meeting of the Select Board for April 4th, 2023. Let's start with updates and announcements from members of the Select Board. Any?
Oh,
Yeah,
I'll
John.
volunteer. When have I never volunteered?
Never.
Devin is going to help me with this. Devin, thank you in advance. So by way of introduction, I think many of you have heard me mention Team Brookline. And I mentioned Team Brookline at this time of year because it's at this time of year that we anticipate with great excitement the, oh, excuse me, there goes my phone. We anticipate the Boston Marathon, and Team Brookline is Brookline's team of charity runners for the Boston Marathon. And they are now running and practicing for the marathon, and that's great. And one of the team members happens to be known to me through Brookline Community Center for Mental Health. And he is a pretty special individual. And I also happen to be connected to a terrific reporter for WCVB by the name of Josh Brogadier. And through a series of connections, I managed to help Josh get in touch with Lakshman Swamy, who is running for Team Brookline to benefit the Brookline Center for Community Mental Health. And the result was, here comes my cue, this feature that aired last night on WCVB.
It's ever been, with an authentic mix of tradition.
We just wrapped up the most grueling stretch in Newton and are on our way to Brookline. But first, there's a 1-mile interlude in the Brighton section of Boston. Run past what some call the dead man's zone, a double entendre to describe your legs after the Newton Hills and the Evergreen Cemetery as you pass by. The reservoir's on your right as you take a hard right onto Chestnut Hill Ave in the 02135. And unlike back in Newton, now it's time to take a left onto Beacon Street.
They're deep, and even though you see them, it's different than the rest of the course. It's very short, but just jump over the tracks.
Sage advice from Lakshman Swamy, which I followed as we head into the town of Brookline, 02445, current population 62,726, established back in 1705. Lakshman's our guide through Brookline, helping us avoid those tracks and much more. His mission is a critical one, an intensive care doctor at Cambridge Health Alliance. He's a charity runner who is putting in the miles for the Brookline Center for Community Mental Health.
I'm hoping that by raising awareness for mental health, we can kind of reduce the stigma, erase the stigma for healthcare workers to seek help.
Beacon Street is lined with brownstones and comes alive with the green line on your left.
It's just a beautiful, I feel like I'm flying through here all the time. It's nice and flat.
Through Cleveland Circle and Washington Square and into Coolidge Corner, where the crowds will beckon you on to the finish.
The energy is going to be so powerful that I'm hoping it just carries us straight through to the end.
The elevation from mile 22 to mile 24 and a half is a steady drop of 150 feet as the race goes mostly downhill. Once you've gotten to St. Mary's Street, you've left Brookline in the rear view and have Boston in your sights up ahead. In Brookline, Josh Brogadier, WCVB Sports Center 5.
So thank you, Devin. And just a little bit more about Team Brookline. I don't know about the people who watched that feature just now, but when I watched it for the first time, when they crossed into Brookline, I remembered every marathon I have ever attended and the excitement that we feel on Marathon Day. So the 5 organizations that benefit from Team Brookline's charity runners, and these are charity runners who train, and then raise money. They raise money for the Brookline Center for Community Mental Health, the Brookline Education Foundation, Brookline Library Foundation, Brookline Symphony Orchestra, and the Brookline Teen Center. And they've done an amazing job over the years. They're doing an amazing job this year. It's by far not too late to sponsor either individual runners or the team. And to do that, you simply go to teambrookline.org. So I hope everyone enjoyed that feature. And I hope people who felt inspired by it might feel inspired to make a donation to some of these amazing runners.
Thank you, John. Any other comments or updates? Okay, let's start. I'm sorry, Chaz.
Yeah, really. Sorry, very quickly. On a more somber marathon related note, this is the 10-year anniversary of the marathon bombing on April 15th, which is a Saturday at 2:30 p.m. At the Brookline Police Memorial, which is at 350 Washington Street. There will be an event co-hosted by the Brookline Police Department, a remembrance ceremony that will include remarks and a moment of silence at 2:49. So strongly encourage members of the community to attend if they're interested. I want to thank the police department and everyone involved in that for putting that together. It was hard to believe that was 10 years ago. And for many of the people, including many of the current members of the police department who responded to that, it's still vivid in their minds. So as a community, it means a lot to come out for that day. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you. It's very, very important. So if there are no other comments or updates from the select board, let's open up to public comments. John?
Thank you very much. And thank you to the public for joining us for public comment. An opportunity for us to hear your perspective on the issues in Brookline that matter to you. We do have a few rules to share. Each person speaking tonight limited to 3 minutes. Don't need to use the entire time. You may if you like. Please refrain from personal attacks. Refrain also from addressing personnel issues. Members of the public sometimes raise questions. We may be able to provide a quick answer to your question, but we're more likely to work with staff to get a thorough answer and to respond over email. We'll let you know when you have 30 seconds remaining and when your time is up. So please conclude your remarks at that time. And if you have more to say, you're welcome to send an email to board members expressing your thoughts in greater detail. And Devin, who's first on our list?
The first person signed up for public comment is Jessica Wonder-Shubo. You can approach the presentation station and your 3 minutes will begin.
Thank you. I'll be faster. Good evening, everyone. Nice to be here in person. I'm here on behalf of the membership of the Brookline Educators Union to call on you to follow school districts throughout the Commonwealth in using ARPA money to pay all educators who met the moment of the COVID crisis. You might decide to transfer the needed funds to the school committee so they can meet their obligation to work directly with us. However, because you've so far chosen to control payments to educators, I'm here to correct the record. Somewhat technically, our members are sharing with you the experiences that has brought about solidarity of the union membership as a whole. First, federal regulations do not restrict payments to in-person work. ARPA rules and regulations from January 2022 define eligible workers as, quote, those workers needed to maintain continuity of operations of essential critical infrastructure sectors and additional sectors as each government may designate as critical to protect the health and well-being of its residents. For example, recipients of ARPA money, quote, may provide services for special populations. For example, enhanced services in schools to address increased rates of behavioral health challenges for youths. Recipients may use funds for programs or services to support equitable access to services and reduce racial, ethnic, socioeconomic disparities in access to high quality treatment. And ARPA money pay can compensate work, quote, addressing educational disparities in disproportionately impacted communities. This eligible use includes services to address disparities in educational outcomes that predate the pandemic and amplified its impact on underserved students. The federal rule governing ARPA expects municipalities and school boards to work with unions in a direct way, not to expect them to leave ideas in a suggestion box. Had this happened so far, educators could have helped You understand that families, disproportionately families of color, called upon the schools to provide remote learning options, and educators made that happen.
You have
From
30
the ground up.
seconds.
Those educators yet to be compensated deserve it. We know the money is there. The union is standing together to ensure this happens this year, this school year. So thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, there are 3 in-person attendees. Would you like to make a public comment? You can come on up.
Hi, folks. Michael. I live over on Tabor Place in Precinct 6.
Could
It
you
is.
give us your last name?
Was that McGraw Herdegg?
Okay.
McGrawherdegg.
I asked for it, didn't I?
Thank you. Yep, appreciate it. It is so cool to be here in person, folks. And I noticed that on the agenda, but withdrawn, was an item about having a remote only town meeting in May. I think that would have been a bad idea. I think the in-person thing is way better. There's so many norms and modalities about the way we communicate with each other that work a lot better in person. It's just so much better to see people's faces and think about what they're thinking and be able to stop when it looks like they don't understand. This Zoom stuff, we do not understand. We have not figured out the norms of communicating online. Emails are misread all the time. People forget to leave their cameras on or off. There's kids and dogs and stuff screaming in the background. It's really messy. With that being said, I hope we can figure stuff out for the fall, because the reason I feel comfortable being here today is that we all just got over COVID 3.5 weeks ago. And so I finally feel like we're not going to spread anything to people being indoors unmasked, and we're not going to catch anything for a little while until the immunity goes away. And that is not a sure thing at any time for the next few years. It's just not always going to happen. Folks are going to be risky to one another. The CDC says you can go indoors with a mask on after 5 days of developing COVID symptoms as you begin to recover. That's really short. You're actually contagious for a lot longer. And I worry that folks will see a really, really close vote on a really, really important topic about something like really significant changes to the way the community works. And the choice they make about showing up or not will affect whether or not the vote passes. That's a really, really, really challenging position to put town meeting members into. So I hope that this fall we'll be able to figure out something that feels a little less scary and worrying about the in-person only way that we have to meet to do the legislative work. I had one other tiny comment. I want to say I'm so proud of the town for the way they handled a tiny municipal issue. I was out with the kids at the playground on Sunday. Part of a building was falling off onto the swing set. So I called the police non-emergency line and said, hey, this is falling off. I called the company that manages the building called Alpha Management, who we've heard the name. We called the building department. The problem was actually fixed in 48 hours. The building is no longer falling off onto the playground. Some combination of the building department, the management company, the police non-emergency line worked. And it was really nice to be able to trust that that would work. So I'm just really happy to live in a community where we trust the folks that help fix this really basic stuff for our infrastructure. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
At this time, there are 3 in-person attendees. We have 17 virtual. I'll be promoting Sana Hafsiz to a panelist.
Mike, are you raising your hand to speak?
No.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Sana Hafiz, BNBC National Program Director, Precinct 4, Brookline resident. There have been a lot of conversations going on via email and other channels, and I think that this deserves to be public record, so I'll proceed. After being tasked with reviewing the proposals submitted with careful detail, the ARP review committee still seems to have a major misunderstanding of our program. The FAA 107 license training is in Brookline. The commercial pilot license training is in Orlando. There is no such thing as a commercial drone pilot certification that Mike referred to in our email communications. For the record, neither Mike nor anyone on the ARPA review committee has accepted any of our many invitations for conversations regarding Black and Brown aviation training program, at which our training department would have been able to break down the logistics and costs of our program in a way that someone outside of the industry, such as yourselves, would understand. Regardless, the fact remains, the cost of our aviation training program is far less than any other flight school. The students graduate with more than double the flight time that standard aviation school students graduate with. These above standard hours are also with the twin engine, which is more costly, but greatly increases job security and resume competitiveness. Hours flown under a twin engine are more valuable due to the fact that most commercial airlines are with a twin engine and not a single engine aircraft. That being said, the Black and Brown community has overwhelmingly supported this proposal and shown support through public comment and many other avenues. We have an obligation to the Black and Brown community to inform them, including the parents of the 5 Brookline kids that took their first flight as pilot in command, as to why the ARPA committee has deemed this program not viable. We feel that it would be a monumental mistake for the aviation program to not receive funding. To not support this initiative is to rob Black and Brown people in Brookline of this specifically designed opportunity to increase racial and economic equity. Mike, Miriam, the rest of the ARPA committee has zero aviation industry experience and have repeatedly failed to explain which part of this proposal is too difficult or complicated multiple times. Our aviation training department has a number of industry experts certified by the FAA. Over 100 years of combined industry experience. I mean, we have sent these references to you days before. This is just, there's absolutely no reason for this back and forth. There's been no concrete explanation as to what is not up to par here. And to be quite honest, it's seeming as though the reason that there's been this much pushback is not one based on viability, based on credentials, clearly.
You have 30
based on
seconds.
the entity supporting this initiative. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Adi Ijanusi. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable. Your 3 minutes will begin.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Good evening, Devin and everyone. Ade Janasi, Black Brookline resident, Precinct 4. Tonight, I'm going to speak as a resident, but also I'll speak in the capacity of an aviator. Might come as a surprise to some of you guys. I am a licensed FAA commercial pilot, hold the rank of a captain. I have a private pilot and instrument flight rating, both in airplanes and helicopters. And one of the members of the Black and Brown Aviation Training Department. So understanding that what I've seen in my life and in my career as a Black captain, what it takes for minorities to make it in this industry and what this opportunity means to us. Right now, it's beginning to feel like it's an intentional, the intent behind it, it's intentional to make sure that we don't help our kids take advantage of this opportunity that we have now, especially in a time in America where the aviation industry is depleted. We've all seen on the news the lack of shortages of pilots in that industry, as well as the drone industry itself, what the Department of Transportation is as envisioned in using this for the future in terms of package delivery. Amazon has gotten their license approved by the FAA. There's a company called Wings that they are doing drone delivery in Texas right now. Anybody can Google them. So the opportunities that we are missing right now are based on a few people that has not been in the industry in comparison to someone like myself that have over 3,000 hours flown, and telling us that the reason the opportunity cannot be provided because they deem it complicated or difficult, but yet fail to have conversations with any one of us. For the record, our chief flight instructor for the program is a man named Joe Crawford, and has been an aviator and a certified flight trainer for 57 years. He was an FAA examiner in 1977, just to put the experience in perspective, and has over 40,000 hours flown. These are the people those that have never been in an aircraft in control as pilot in command are telling us that it seems difficult. So as at this point, we've tried to reach out, but the intent now is clear that we are trying to marginalize Black and Brown kids and
You have 30 seconds.
Thank you, Devin. And rid them of an opportunity in a time where America is in need of that workforce and an opportunity to become something beyond what we as Black people are known or used to dreaming of. There's a reason it's only 1.2% Black and brown pilots in America in that industry. So I hope we reconsider and know what we're doing, because history will be the judge. Thank you.
At this time, there are 3 in-person attendees and 17 via Zoom. No one is using the hand raise or Q&A feature to indicate they'd like to make a comment.
May I just briefly talk about the premium pay?
I
Sure.
do have another hand.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to promote Matt Picard. Hi, Matt. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable. Your 3 minutes will begin.
Great, thank you. Let me share my video. There you go. Hello, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. My name is Matt Picard, and I teach 5th grade at Heath School, and I taught 5th grade in the Remote Learning Academy. There are several educators in the town, not just those in the RLA, who gave themselves fully to making school work for kids during the 2020-2021 school year, who've not received a $4,000 bonus in recognition for their efforts and sacrifices. And I'd like to speak to my own experiences during that time to give you a sense of the personal impact of the town's decision. In the summer of 2020, in response to the threat posed by the pandemic, the town of Brookline decided to create the Remote Learning Academy in order to meet the needs of the 700 children and their families who needed a remote option. And my colleagues and I, in turn, answered this call. The town asked that this school be created, and despite there being no precedent and having only weeks to bring it together, we did it. And honestly, it was really hard. It was hard to take all of our existing curriculum materials meant to be delivered in person and to innovate and to convert them to work online, on Zoom, live, all day. It was hard to be cut off from our homeschool communities, supports, and colleagues. It was hard to try to meet the needs of many students with disabilities and English language learners and those who were simply struggling with being alone in their rooms, cut off from their peers. My colleagues and I in the RLA all went through the same thing, working relentlessly to meet the needs of our students, and some going as far as to hand deliver a desk to a student's house who had no work surface. And it was hard, but it was really meaningful. There was joy when everyone held up their projects made by the pre-assembled kits that I had taken hours to make and deliver to their schools and homes. When a student got it after I'd been up till midnight the night before preparing lessons, when we finally got to see each other in person during our distance meetups, and when I had a parent say to me, thank you for taking this horrible situation and making it work for my child. I've been so worried about them through all of this. And, it was moments like this, for that reason, that I wouldn't take it back, bonus or no, but, I and everyone else who gave their all during this time really deserve it, because by not giving it, despite, saying thanks and we wish we could give it to you, ultimately what the town is saying is that what we did and what we gave mattered less than other people. And that's wrong. All educators in the town deserve—
You have 30 seconds.
All educators in the town deserve recognition, appreciation, and stipends for making school work for the children and families of this town during the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
At this time, I'm going to promote Carolyn Thal.
Hi, Carolyn Thal, town meeting member, precinct 16. I wasn't actually intending to speak until I saw Matt Picard. I'll admit I am ignorant of the issue that he's talking about, but Matt was my children's teacher. He was an amazing teacher at the Baker School. He led what used to be the Enrichment Challenge and Support Program, which sadly is now gone. Matt Picard is exactly the kind of educator that this district wants to have and needs to have and has always been proud to have. As he just explained, building or no building. So sorry to take time, but I can't resist just, I don't know what the issue is. I hope it will be explained and discussed, but whatever Matt Picard is telling you is legit, and he's legit. You don't want to lose people like him. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Ty Payne. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable, and your 3 minutes will begin.
Oh, hello, good evening. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm one of the program directors for the BNBC, Black and Brown Club. I've always came to voice my thoughts on the first historic aviation training program. So I'm gonna stay on that since the other colleagues represented. And just once again, just, you know, anytime I have the opportunity to say how important that is for Black lives, that's what really matters to us. You know, we go around, especially me, I speak on that every day. I share it on my social medias. I talk to inner city kids that live in different cities. A lot of my family lives in Georgia, Alabama, California, New York, everywhere. I've told everybody about this and they're all proud of it. So I think it's building like a good, shining a great light on the historically racist town of Brookline. And this would be a great opportunity for I think the spirit that weighs over Brookline's head to change, you know, because it's like there's two different views of Brookline. Like the prosperous people view it one way, and then the people that live here that are not so fortunate to have silver spoons, they view it another way. But the people that don't have silver spoons, we can get a silver spoon. But it's like, will you allow us to actually have one if you really cared? Or it's like, wow, do some people really like, do you feel great waking up out of your bed knowing that other people have to wake up to suffer? So it's like the fact that you have these little talks, it kind of is in the back of your mind is helping. So you get like a B+ for moral effort. But we're just trying to say if Black lives really mattered, could we ask you guys some questions one day? Not tonight, obviously, but like in the future, if we could have a meeting on maybe what Black lives matters to y'all. What does that mean to you guys? Because to us, it means something powerful enough to affect change for the generations, and maybe for us to establish some generational wealth so that maybe there could be 2 families living over there by the Brookline High School that are Black. You know what I mean? Instead of just one for like 40 years. But I'm just trying to express how important that is to the town once again. And you know, like I said, every kid in Brookline has the opportunity to be whatever he wants. And we just hope that that could be said for the Black and brown mothers of Brookline to come up. So thank you very much. I just hope that Brookline allows us to go through. We have all the experience.
You have 30 seconds.
All right. And hopefully the people that don't have the experience, but they're giving out the answer to whether this could go or not, that even they can learn. So it's like everybody could win. And then, you know, we can all grow as one, and we'll all have futures and promising lives in this town. But does everybody really want that? Or is that just a topic for us to just be wasting time for another 10 years? And thank you for letting me speak. One love.
At this time, there are 18 virtual attendees and 2 in person. That concludes public comment. Oh,
Thank you, Devin.
there is another hand. Do you want
Sure.
to promoting Justin Brown? You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
Thanks, members. I would like to take the opportunity to support Matt Picard and Jess Winder-Shubo in their comments about ensuring that all PSB educators who worked during the pandemic receive the ARPA funds, the COVID pay that has been awarded to only some of them. So Carolyn, this might help you understand the issue. I am a fourth grade teacher with 18 years of experience at the Lawrence School, and I, like countless other colleagues, went through the excruciatingly difficult experience of teaching during the pandemic. I taught in 3 modes: first remotely, second in a hybrid mode, and third in person during that 1 year. All very challenging in different ways, but it is remote teaching, what Matt and his colleagues did, that is perhaps the most unprecedented, and was perhaps for our team the most difficult part of delivering instruction, building community, reaching and connecting with our students in a moment of uncertainty and crisis. And what RLA educators did can't be underestimated in the difficulty and also the success that they brought to their work. We were surprised, many educators were surprised about the ARPA funds and the COVID pay, and then quickly outraged that not everybody was receiving this bonus for teaching during that time. I am speaking to dozens and dozens of members of the BEU and PSB employees and fellow colleagues who are outreached and ready to use our voices, speak together, stand by each other to ensure that this pay is delivered to everybody. We deserve it, and everybody deserves it, regardless of their function during that time. We all heard the call to step up and deliver quality education to the students of the public schools of Brookline. And with that, I'll conclude my comments.
I just want to clarify a couple of things on the premium pay issue, because I know this is maybe the first time members of the public are hearing about this. So the American Rescue Plan Act funding, of which Brookline received $44 million, some from the county, some directly to us, has a provision that says premium pay up to additional $13 an hour can be provided to eligible workers performing essential work. Now, essential work, as defined by the final rule, means work that is, quote, not performed while teleworking from a residence, and involves either regular in-person interaction with patients, the public, or coworkers, or regular physical handling of items that were handled by or to be handled by patients, the public, or coworkers. So, unfortunately, teleworking, remote work, is not what the federal government deemed essential for the purposes of premium pay. Now, other communities may have been able to use a smaller source of ARPA funding called revenue replacement funding, which has fewer strings attached, to provide additional premium pay to workers who did not otherwise qualify. So that may be where some of this confusion stems from. The premium pay provisions of ARPA do not allow us to pay workers who teleworked. That is just the rule. So that may be where some of this confusion comes from. This issue of premium pay was ongoing before I came into this job last September. Now, after an analysis of staff recommendations, the select board agreed on an across-the-board payment of $4,000 to current employees who served in person for at least 40 days during the first year of the pandemic was appropriate. Part-time employees were offered prorated amounts, and contract employees, that is, individuals who were not eligible for town school benefits, did not qualify, nor did employees who are no longer in town or school service, or employees who worked fully remotely during that period. I will say, as someone who also worked remotely in emergency management during that period for a different municipality, I understand, and I know the select board understands, this has led to disappointment among those who retired or left municipal service prior to the benefit being available, or to those who worked remotely, especially under the conditions that were described here tonight. It is not to minimize or in any way behave as though that work was not an incredibly valued part of this community. But the issue is the premium pay program as it currently exists cost the town $6 million, which is likely to be the single largest or one of the largest individual projects that the town undertakes with the ARPA money. So ultimately, the town made the decision to allocate these funds in this manner in order to balance the federal funding requirements, competing community priorities. You have heard from an organization tonight concerned that they have a competing community priority of their own that is not being funded under the ARPA round 2 as the slate currently stands, retention goals for current employees, and the aim of providing meaningful compensation to as broad a group of employees as was practicable within these other constraints. It is difficult when the resources are limited to draw these lines and to figure out how to draw them, but especially given the very limited amount of revenue replacement funds and the need to ensure that those funds are held in reserve in the event that other activities are declared ineligible for other ARPA conditions by the federal government. We need to be very cautious about how we spend these limited dollars. One final note on this. This premium pay program was announced in December. The select board voted on allocating this money in January. There have been hearings on a weekly basis at the ARPA committee to discuss additional funds that could go out in round 2. This is coming to the select board for the first time in the first week of April. So I understand the concern. I don't believe it's any less, legitimate or relevant, but the time to raise that concern was in December or January or February or March at any of the publicly noticed meetings on this subject. As it stands, the select board has already issued the premium pay checks. The ARPA round 2 slate is set for a public vote on Friday after numerous hearings to discuss what it is. And at that juncture, the community funding process for ARPA will effectively be concluded because the funds will have been fully obligated. So while I understand and in no way mean to minimize the efforts of all employees, remote or in person, during an incredibly difficult time, the time for this discussion has passed. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next, let's go to our miscellaneous calendar and vote on approval of meeting minutes from March 21st, 2023 and March 28th, 2023. Does anyone have any questions or edits to those minutes? Hearing none, I move approval of the meeting minutes, March 21 and 28, 2023. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
Mark? Mike?
Aye.
Sorry. And chair votes aye. Okay, next, we have.
Didn't get a sandwich. There's no cup here.
Mm.
And you
No,
know
I
what
got
my-
your cup. You get a cup. Everybody gets a cup.
Okay, give me a break. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
It was the
6,
it was the
7,
tater
8,
tots.
10, 9, 10. Okay, we have 10 items that I'm going to sort of summarize in our miscellaneous calendar.
Sure.
First, 2 grants. One from the National Association of County and City Health Officials in the amount of $5,000 for the Medical Reserve Corps, and a grant for $5,000 from NEMA, which is
Massachusetts Emergency Management.
Association, right? Okay. Hazardous Materials Emergency Planning to update Brookline's Hazardous Materials Emergency Response Plan. And then we have a contract with the National Association of County and City Health Officials in the amount of $5,000 for emergency preparedness supplies. Then we have 3 authorizations to hire. First, for a recreation leader in the Recreation Department. Second, cemetery supervisor and pipe layer in the Public Works Department. And third, authorization to hire a lieutenant provisional appointment and sergeant in civil service in the police department. Next, appropriation request from the health department, and then an appropriation transfer from the police department, an appropriation request from the advisory committee, and finally a donation in the amount of $250 from the town of Weston to support the Hidden Brookline walking tour conducted by Barbara Brown. Any questions regarding those items or comments? Thank you, Town of Weston.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay, I move approval of the 10 items that I mentioned, that I listed. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Mike, John,
Aye.
Miriam,
Aye.
Michael,
Thank you, Bernard. Aye.
and chair votes aye. Okay, now we're gonna have a discussion of town meeting. Let me get down on my computer here. Okay, so we originally had 2 items on the agenda related to the May annual town meeting. First, whether to hold it as a hybrid meeting, and second, whether to hold it remotely. But those items are now moot, since we do not have a request from the moderator to hold either of such meetings, and the select board has no authority to unilaterally act. The moderator will shortly discuss our reasons, and the town administrator and possibly others will describe the many, many issues that we would have to have addressed if we had tried to hold either a hybrid or a remote town meeting. Mike Salmon and I will also offer our observations of the Plymouth hybrid town meeting that we attended this past Saturday. And let me say this now, and I'll say it later. We plan and we urge the town to organize itself for a hybrid town meeting in November. And our trip to Plymouth gave us a lot of insights and information about that will help pull that together. So Mike and I joined State Representative Tommy Vitolo, Moderator Kate Poverman, and Clerk Ben Kaufman for a visit to Plymouth. It wasn't a junket. We paid our own way. Our purpose was to observe their hybrid town meeting. We were very graciously hosted by Senator Susan Moran and Representatives Michael Muratori and Kathleen R. Natra, and warmly welcomed by the moderator, Stephen Trafletti, and Plymouth town meeting members. As you may know, Plymouth was able to obtain home rule authorization for a hybrid meeting last summer. Our purpose in going to Plymouth was to observe that hybrid town meeting in anticipation that we would hold the fall town meeting as a hybrid meeting, which again, I urge the staff to begin planning. Plymouth is like Brookline in population, but is not as built up as we are, and with very different demographics. Among the rituals at the beginning of town meeting were the Pledge of Allegiance, the national anthem, and an invocation in the form of a Christian prayer. There was then a reading of the names of people who had passed, which I think very appropriately included not just town meeting members, but also employees of the town. Their town meeting is comprised of 162 members from 18 9-member precincts. At this hybrid meeting, about 124 town meeting members attended in person in the very nice modern auditorium in one of their 2 high schools. Of the approximately 33 members who attended remotely, only 2 tried to speak. One, the school committee chair, was not able to speak for technical reasons, and the other who spoke multiple times had no problems. Not to minimize the benefits of remote participation, one observation of mine is that those members who were remote had a distinct disadvantage in that they were not able to interact with their colleagues face to face, feel the tension in the room around certain articles which we experienced, and hear the murmurs when a town official said something questionable, and generally be connected to their colleagues. The smell of the grease paint and the roar of the crowd, as they say in the theater, was missing. Any rate, Plymouth is struggling with the MBTA Community Act, just like Brookline, and their issues are both similar and different from ours. The vice chair of the planning board reported that they were concerned about the impact of the act on the town's infrastructure and on the character of the town, a phrase that may have a different nuance in the context of Plymouth. The infrastructure problems, interestingly, included, according to a couple members I talked to, housing developments in certain parts of town that were putting extreme pressure on their water infrastructure. They get their water from an EPA designated sole source aquifer, which is to say an aquifer that is subject to contamination or the threat of contamination and is, I guess, being monitored by the EPA and Mass DEP for contamination. And the contamination is coming from septic system runoff into the ground above the aquifer in certain fast developing areas of town. And I mention that because this illustrates the importance of careful planning for any type of development, even here in Brookline. So in sum, it's always enlightening to see how other communities function and are governed and the issues they have. And our trip to Plymouth was well worth getting up at an ungodly hour in the morning to get there. Mike, do you want to add anything?
No, that's, well, a tiny bit perhaps, Bernard. Thank you. That was very good. I think certainly one of the things that we saw in action was the amount of preparation, the results of all of the preparation that they did. They had a big screen up in the high school auditorium to do closed captioning, to provide closed captioning throughout the meeting. They are using different voter software than we're going to be using, although we could, in fact, use that voter software on the tablets that the Brookline IT department has purchased. We could do that in November. And they talked about all of the work that had been done. They had a rather contentious time when they scheduled an in-person meeting in the fall. And I think the hybrid meeting was a response to that. And they acknowledged, the people that we talked to, that it took months for them to get it all organized and do the testing that they had to do to make sure that it worked, and the training of people who wanted to be remote. So, the lesson for us was sort of what the same lesson as we heard when we talked to our own staff and to the Brookline Interactive Group about what it would take to get a hybrid meeting together in May. I'm probably the most enthusiastic about that of anybody well, I shouldn't say that, but I am very enthusiastic about it. I don't know whether others are equally about a hybrid meeting, but I was convinced by what the Brookline Interactive Group had to say, that it just wasn't feasible to do it in May, and indeed we should be doing it for November.
Thank you. I think the moderator wants to speak, but why don't you go first?
That's fine. Kate can go.
Okay.
I'll be happy to wait.
Is Kate Barberman?
Okay, so the issue of remote versus in person has been talked about a lot and has been given a lot of thought by many people, including me, which is why I submitted the letter last week requesting that a remote meeting occur, and then I withdrew it. And I'll give you some of the reasons why I withdrew it. Remote meeting, certainly, as we know, has benefits of making town meeting more accessible to many of our town meeting members, and many town meeting members were in favor of it. An equal number were in favor of meeting back in person. However, there were legal risks, which I will explain to you, which might make your head spin as much as they did mine when Joe Callahan first explained them to me. And they were risks that I was not willing to take, which would be involved in holding the remote town meeting. Let me just go through the facts and the risks as I understand them, just so you'll have an idea of how non-trivial and not easy a decision this was. So as you know, the warrants for the annual town meeting for May 23rd with 25 articles were executed, went out, posted by the constables. Warrants can't be withdrawn. You can't pull them back and say, okay, now we're going to execute another one. One was also executed for a special town meeting for firearms with just one article. So in order to have another town meeting remotely, the select board would have to approve my request, which they can't because I withdrew it. And they would have to execute a warrant calling for a remote town meeting containing the same articles for a different date. One of the complications is that articles on the 25 articles have already started for the advisory committee and other places. So while it may not be necessary to rehear or have all of those meetings again, public comment might be necessary on them. Not a problem that can't be overcome, but certainly one that takes time. So in terms of logistics and legal issues, we would need to hold a remote town meeting the day before the already noticed in-person meeting. Partly just for practical reasons and when the meeting, the high school is available. So we'd have to start the remote town meeting on May 22nd. At the beginning of the remote town meeting members would have to approve holding the remote town meeting. If that vote passes, the remote town meeting would proceed like the ones have for the past 2 or 3 years, and we would debate articles, et cetera, probably the first few articles. And then we would not adjourn, but say, okay, we will, see you later, next time. Because the warrant was issued for the open town meeting, we are still legally required to meet the next day on May 23rd and open the in-town annual or in-person annual town meeting. A quorum of town meeting members would have to be there, which is about 180 town meeting members. It's hard to predict if 180 people would show up or not, given how high passions rise about the issue of remote versus in person. Probably they would. And then would 91 of them vote in favor of holding the meeting in person? Assuming they did, or rather, excuse me, it would have to vote to adjourn the in-person town meeting for the remote meeting to continue. Like I said, this is my head kind of spins there. So let's say they voted to adjourn the town meeting. Then we're fine, and we just go back to the remote meeting. Let's say it fails to pass, and they say, no, we wanted a town meeting in person, we're having the town meeting in person. Then you're gonna have to run 2 simultaneous town meetings, probably on alternating days, one remote, one in person, have quorums on each. This has never been done as far as we know by any town. We don't legally know whether this could be challenged, whether decisions made in the live town meeting could be challenged by the fact that there was an ongoing town meeting deciding different articles. And I frankly did not think it worth going through rolling the dice and invalidating everything that we would be doing. And I'm not even talking about the logistics and people who would be involved in this. So I decided to play it safe and go in person. We will be setting up the protections for people who are immunocompromised, worried about being in person, and I fully understand those concerns. And we will be doing everything we can to meet in a hybrid fashion, which Plymouth did in an exemplary method and showed that it involves a lot of preparation and backup, which was also very helpful in showing us that with the legislation passed a week ago, we could not have been ready in May to have enacted or put in place hybrid legislation. So those are my reasons. I know a lot of people will be upset that we aren't having remote. I know a lot of people will be happy we'll be in person. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Or make Joe Callanan answer them if he's here.
I did ask Chaz to give us a general review of the difficulties of doing a hybrid meeting so that we know what is involved in preparing for November. But before you go, I want to let Miriam make her comment, I assume it is, right?
I appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you. I do feel compelled to say something, especially because, like many, this really directly affects me and my ability to participate in this coming town meeting. So you won't see me at a lot of those nights, or you will see me leaving halfway through. Because as you all know, or if you don't know, I'm a single mother of teenagers, and it's not about getting a babysitter. It's actually about being home and present to make sure that they're fed and they go to bed in time to get up for school the next day. And that is my priority. So I will do my best, but this is prohibitive. And I only wish you'd been willing, Kate, to take the risk. Certainly, I would have been willing to take the risk because I think it really does impact many more people than have the voice to express how it impacts them. And that is part of the problem at its core. The folks who can and want to show up for 7 nights generously,
It'll be more like
right?
4 this year. That's my goal.
7 nights,
4.
all night. You know, those are the folks who have time to be on their emails and who have time to call and who have time to advocate. It's the folks that actually can't show up for 7 nights who also don't have time to do all this advocacy for what they need. So I'm here for those folks because those folks are me. And I really, really hope, I know we will solve this for November. And I'm just really disappointed that we couldn't have a remote town meeting and solve this for May. That will 100% impact me. Thank you.
So Chaz is going to talk about hybrid. I mean, you can talk about remote if you want, but the focus is really hybrid,
right,
in preparation for November.
And I want to thank both members of BIG and Ben Kaufman, the town clerk, for their efforts on this and discussing it and working through it. Ben's memo is in the packet. I have a memo as well. I want to make sure that winds up in the packet that was sent to the select board members, talking more about the remote meetings. If people have any questions or follow up on that, members of the public can read that document. I think it explains some of the issues that the moderator laid out in terms of competing town meetings and the process by which that would happen. For hybrid meetings, the reality of the situation is rewiring the high school auditorium, which is in pretty continual use from now until town meeting, requires a level of staffing, technology, and time that we don't have. It is just not possible to get it set up by town meeting. And what I want to emphasize here too is that we talk about how locked up that building is. The only date available for a practice session, which would be vital to make sure that it actually worked, is May 4th. That's the only day before town meeting, but after the election. It's 2 days after the election. So I would hope that new town meeting members, if they're elected, are ready to go to training on May 4th. That's the only day that it would be available. So we have currently a month in order to completely rewire the high school auditorium to make sure that it is accessible and appropriate for a hybrid town meeting. And that is just not possible, unfortunately, by any stretch of the imagination. I've heard comments from folks to the effect of, well, you knew this was coming. Why didn't you do anything about it? And I understand the concern about that. What I will say about this is we were caught very much off guard by the decision of the legislature to authorize what they had never authorized, even during the pandemic, which was a hybrid town meeting. It was a provision inserted into a budget, a supplemental budget by the Senate only. We had no idea whether the House would concur with it. We had, mere weeks between when it was floated by the Senate only and when it was on the governor's desk for signature. And when we had previous discussions about this, which is a really costly endeavor to wire the high school, we were told in so many words, it's not going to happen, so don't waste your money. Better to seek a home rule petition and then spend the money rather than spend the money on something the legislature is not going to do. So imagine our surprise when the legislature, with a minimum of discussion, suddenly said, you know what, we're doing it. heck with it. So I agree that it is unfortunate from the perspective of people who were looking forward to the possibility of this, that we were caught off guard by the suddenness of this movement. But what I will say is, if it's the directive of this board to prepare for a hybrid town meeting and to expend the funds to do that, we stand ready to do that right away. I know if you read the clerk's memo, it says the same thing. We are ready to make this effort and to make it an effective and meaningful experience. That is to say, to take the time and the energy to make sure that this is not hybrid in name only, but that it provides meaningful and full access, whether you are remote or in person at the November town meeting. So I'm happy to answer any questions from the board. And I know members of BIG and the clerk's office are here too, if you have questions for them.
The cost of preparing the high school is going to be substantial, as I understand. Are we we have the money even separate from the override?
It would probably necessitate, so I have a couple of thoughts on this, but we're still kind of gaming this out.
Okay.
We may be able to use some of the remnants of the American Rescue Plan Act.
Yeah, that's
funding
what I was just thinking.
that we don't, that if, especially if we currently have some money, a little bit of money left in the COVID response by CARES Act rollover, not much, but some. We want to try and figure out how to make this work in a way that doesn't break the bank. So it may necessitate in the short term a reserve fund transfer with the hope that we could reconcile accounts in such a way with ARPA or another source of grant funding, for example, to balance this out.
Yeah, I guess my point is that we're definitely going to do it, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be cheap. It's going to be very difficult in many ways. Mike, you had a.
I just want to make sure, Chaz, ended with a comment that if the select board wants to do this, the town will certainly make the town staff and I appreciate BIG will also have to do the same thing, make the effort to do it. And I want to make sure that people understand that's for November, not for May. That May is off the table.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments from the select board? I'd like to you mentioned a couple items in the select board packet. And I found out recently that a lot of people in town have no idea how to get to that packet. Could I ask Devin to sort of give a brief summary of how they can get to the packet and see these documents?
I'm happy to, Bernard. Thank you for asking. I'm the assistant town administrator, Devin Fields, and anyone who has access to the internet can go to brooklinema.gov and visit our calendar webpage where you find all publicly posted meetings. And then inserted in every agenda per a bylaw that was passed a few years ago is a link to all of the meeting materials for that meeting. So for select board meetings, you would go to the calendar. That's every Tuesday. You can find the select board meeting and you would just click on the link that says click here for packet materials. And that is where you are redirected to our live time packet sharing software called OnBase. And if you'll give me 2 minutes to share my screen, Bernard, I can do this for everyone.
And I'd like to add that it's conveniently located on the landing page of brooklinema.gov. So you don't have to go very far to find it.
It's true. We're here on the town's website. These are all of our publicly posted meetings. You would click show more because Tuesday is a very popular meeting day in the town of Brookline. You'll go down to 5 o'clock. You'll see there are 2 meetings happening at 5 o'clock. Here's the select board meeting. You'll click details. You'll scroll down. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll always see an opportunity to download the agenda. This will give you a PDF version of the agenda and packet, or you can just scroll down and see where you can click on the agenda meeting materials, which will bring you to the date and time of the meeting. Here is the agenda. And if you click on these individual agenda items, you'll see on the right-hand side, all of the supporting documents show up and you are able to click on those, read through the agreements, exactly what the select board is seeing and using in their packet. If you don't like this format of the supporting documents showing up as individual documents on the right-hand side of the page, you can go to the upper left-hand corner to the full agenda packet, which is often referred to in our meetings. And this is one large PDF, oftentimes can be over thousands of pages. And you can see the bookmarks on the left-hand side that guide you to the items that are being discussed in the respective agenda items in each meeting. And we have this for all boards and commissions.
I want to caution people who like to read paper as opposed to their screens. If you press print on today's packet, your printer will need 143 pages, unless, of course, you print on both sides. And that's a short packet.
That's relatively
They're
light.
typically more like
Yeah,
300.
Tiny.
Reading on the screen is unfortunately the way that I think most people will be doing this.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not easy, but it is accessible, and I just urge people to keep at it and just figure out how to get there. And hopefully at some point we'll be able to make it much easier to access these documents.
A brief corollary, if I may, just in terms of accessibility and making sure of awareness. It came to my attention that certain people didn't know that the same bookmark feature that Devin just mentioned is also available in the town meeting warrant and the combined reports. So when the combined reports are issued, you can do the same thing, download the one big PDF, but look at the table of contents, look at the bookmarks, because you can actually click through to the warrant articles you want. I heard a rumor today that a long-serving town meeting member thought that we didn't do that. I want to tell you, we do that.
Yeah.
I learned about that at the last town meeting.
Okay. And you're not a 1900s person.
No.
Right? And those of us from the 20th century have even harder time. Any rate,
Oh, speak for yourself.
okay.
Young as you'd seem to think I am. But I
I'm trying to be nice to you, okay?
I appreciate the compliment.
Well, everything is relative.
Right.
That's
I'm
true.
younger than you, you're right.
Yes. Okay, don't rub it in. Okay, so any other questions or comments from the select board? Okay, so since the moderator has not requested a remote town meeting and the select board cannot unilaterally impose one, the annual town meeting warrant and the special town meeting 2 warrant that called for an in-person town meeting remains in effect, and town meeting will be held in person at the high school auditorium. I just want to emphasize, I think Chaz mentioned, but I want to emphasize again that those town meeting members who, because of disability or other reasons, desire reasonable accommodations, that they contact our ADA administrator, Sarah Kaplan, or Devin in the select board's office, and we will work with you. We'll work hard to make sure that you can both safely and easily attend and participate in town meeting, as we always do. But I just want to emphasize that we are really focused on ensuring that there are as few obstacles as possible. Kathy Bisbee, did you want to?
Can I just say
speak?
one thing?
Sure.
I just wanted to, first of all, I'm very excited to work with the town staff to make hybrid happen in the fall. We're really excited to get all of that equipment and the staffing that we need to make sure we can pull off hybrid. And I'm really looking forward to that. I just want to say that if, Bernard, you would like to have a play-by-play for the hybrid in November, I'm sure we can ask Representative Vitolo, as he's been doing the play-by-play for the high school basketball games for us. Maybe we can ask him to do a town meeting play-by-play.
Good.
And then the last thing I wanted to say was just, there's 2 things that I think BIG can do to help make things, Miriam, to your point about advocacy. Anyone in the community can come into BIG before town meeting and make content, and we can air that content before and after town meeting on our community cable channels that might help for those who want to do extra advocacy for issues that they're working on. Please call us up and we'll make sure that members of the community can advocate using these resources here.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, any other discussion of this? Okay, let's move on. There's no need for a vote, of course. Next item is the department budget review, pardon me. Okay, department budget review, first council on aging. Do we have someone?
Yes, Ruth Ann Dobek is present.
Hi.
Hi.
So, go ahead.
Yes, Devin, will you please share the screen?
You're all set.
Thank you. It is my honor and privilege to be before the board. Again, it's Ruth Ann Dobek, the director of the Brookline Council on Aging. The Council on Aging is extremely proud of its efforts in building a secure and sustainable budget, as well as our response to COVID and the ongoing issues facing older adults. First slide shows our budget request. This year, it is a level services budget. We are requesting $1,063,000. This is an increase of $19,318 to cover some service contracts. Our parking lease at 112 Center Street is up for renewal. And this actually is the first time that there's an increase in this parking since we opened in 2001. We were paying the exact same rate for 22 years. So this is the first time we're seeing a parking rate increase. The other contractual increase is for building cleaning. That contract will also end and needs a small amount of adjustment. We always like to say that our budget is primarily for personnel. 86% of it, the $911,000, goes towards staffing, 11 full-time positions and 4 part-time for the Council on Aging. We are really proud that we've brought in $449,000 in additional funding for our budget and for the town. We are thankful to the many generous donors, sponsors of the community who make sure that our nonprofit remains robust and able to fund staff, programs, and services. We receive funding from federal, state, and private sources. And this amount does not even equal the amount that we received for ARPA funding, but it really makes a difference. It shows that 57% of our funding comes from the town, and all the additional funding comes from these outside sources. Our ARPA funding was very important to us. Again, the Council on Aging is serving a vulnerable population that was deeply impacted by COVID. We received a state earmark in the amount of $165,000, and then some town ARPA in amount of $400,000 that is important for essential services. We focused on transportation, technology, social services, food insecurity, and employment for older adults, all essential items. Our senior citizens are vulnerable and deeply impacted by COVID. We prioritize those most impacted and vulnerable. These include women. I would like to note that it is women who often suffer economically, even those who start off their retirement with high funds often outlive their money when they make it to their 90s. People of color are again a priority for their economic needs and health disparity issues. We focus on those that are not proficient in English and need translation and supportive services. We also focus on the LGBTQIA community to provide support in a welcoming center. We also are very much focused again on the frailest and oldest citizens. I always like to remind the community that we have many people over the age of 100 still living in their own dwellings and needing our support. So those oldest, frailest, and those experiencing health and dementia. Those who live in public housing are Brookline housing residents. And then those who are economically disadvantaged and insecure and need our support. I want to spend a minute just discussing that COVID for older adults is still a major concern. There's an excellent article in the Atlantic that outlines that COVID is not over for our older adults. There's many reasons. They were isolated, their health risks, the current labor shortage, the inflation causes, health disparity, people put off getting appointments, getting health conditions. So COVID is still a significant issue that we are facing and will continue to prioritize in FY24. Now to discuss our accomplishments and goals. There are many, but to select three, again, the theme of bringing in ARPA and outside money is one of our proudest accomplishments. There's so much that we can do for essential services with these funds. Second, a shout out to our social work staff and social services department. These are the people who are seeing the most vulnerable and needy people facing everything from eviction, depression, anxiety, stress, health issues. And our team of social workers are there to provide the counseling, support, and resources. So that was a major accomplishment this year. And finally, transportation. People who know me and my career know that transportation is always a high priority of older adults. And again, we're very proud that through some outside funding that we really have been able to increase the way that older adults obtain their transportation and access. In the month of January alone, there was over 1,000 rides, more than 600 and something to medical appointments, and another 300 rides back and forth to the senior center and for meals and other issues. In terms of our goals for next year, the concern now is around finding sustainable funding. We all know that ARPA was a shot in the arm and a once in a career opportunity. But unfortunately, those needs that I addressed around food insecurity, transportation, social services, employment, technology, those are not going to go away magically in 2026 when the ARPA funding ends. So our goal is to be ensuring that we have sustainable funding. Our next goal is specifically for our mid-management professional staff. These salaries are not in competition with other communities, and we're really looking to make sure that our staff stays well in the range of their competitors and are compensated fairly. Finally, again, another goal, which is ongoing, is around the transportation issue to again make sure that we have sustainable funding and are providing options for the full spectrum of needs of elders. You have everyone from independent people to those who need someone to accompany them on medical visits. So we are in the process of having those very strong options developed. Next, around the issue of our personnel and changes, we are not seeking any additional staffing from the town. A couple of weeks ago, I was before this board, as you know, and we were fortunate to receive some support from our nonprofit and other funding. For example, our van drivers, full-time salary, our fitness coordinator, and others are all paid for outside sources. Indeed, the Council on Aging has 33 positions, and of that, only 15 are on the municipal paid. 18 come from those other sources. And we will continue to look for those means for obtaining those grants and private donations. The next question that you asked was if there was no budget constraints. And again, I'm going to bang the drum around transportation. And I'm actually going to speak not only about older adults, but use this opportunity to ask the town and other public stakeholders to see if there's any interest in the town of Brookline conducting a transportation option that would be for on demand for many of our populations. This is a climate and disparity issue. We see a need not only for older adults to have subsidized transportation, but students, low income, people of color, people living in South Brookline who do not have access to public transportation. And I recently have had the opportunity to listen to many of the ARPA requests and found that many of the organizations were talking about a larger need around transportation. The food pantry was talking about that as a need. The adult education was talking for school in their summer program providing. Our own recreation department about the needs to get young kids, students. So if there were no budget constraints, I would urge the town to consider a model that has existed in Newton. The city of Newton provides, it's called NUMO. It's a transportation option for, it started just for older adults, but is now for the entire community. Again, transportation is expensive. I'm aware of that, but I think it is an issue for the town to address long-term. Finally, I would also just like to end with a request that I make almost annually, is that we look ahead for a couple of years for the Council on Aging. And with that, making sure that we have a strategic plan in place. Our transportation continues to grow. And these needs are certainly something that the community should address. Again, we are thankful to the entire community. We have a strong pool of volunteers, sponsors, our advocacy, our members, and we thank everyone for their efforts in making Brookline the great place it is to age and grow old with dignity. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Delbeck. Any questions from the select board? John?
Not so much a question as a comment, and Ruth Ann, thank you so much. I have had the distinct privilege as a member of the select board of being the select board's designated liaison to the Council on Aging. which has led me to attend many meetings of the Council on Aging. And I'm going to say something a little bit unexpected, perhaps, and that is that people who do not view themselves as being in that demographic really ought to come to the occasional meeting of the Council on Aging. They have a really active group of people. They were among the first to meet post-COVID, or at least as we were emerging from COVID, among the first to meet in person, but also hybrid. Maybe we should have asked them to help us set up the town meeting hybrid, but they got it done. They continue to conduct their meetings in hybrid fashion. And they have a lively party every year. And so the senior center is definitely a place that would welcome not only older adults, but also anybody who wants to see one of the better facets of service in Brookline, and one of the better examples of leadership on the part of Ruth Ann, but also the chair of the Council on Aging, Yolanda Rodriguez. So I just want to, from a personal perspective, say that I'm glad I got that designation. It's been a real pleasure for me to work with the council.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Yes. Mary.
I'm just going to say thank you for the feedback on the ARPA funds, because I think that really was a target audience for us. And so it's nice to hear that it was working in the way it was intended to.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Ruth Ann. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, we have HR benefits. Do we have Ann Braga? Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm here tonight to present the Human Resources fiscal 24 budget. Devin, I'm assuming I have screen share.
You do.
Thank you. Here we go. So there we go. Are you seeing the full screen, or are you seeing a preview screen as well?
We see the preview. Just change your display settings.
Second. Let's try this again.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Try this again.
It looks like it's working.
There you go.
Okay. Just had to switch. I have two monitors at home, so there we go. The Brookline Human Resources Fiscal 24 budget, serving Brookline employees and retirees. We work with all employees and retirees, including school department personnel for a variety of issues. And we work with our retirees for health insurance and benefits changes as they move through their next chapter. Who we are. So this is our overview, who we are, our activities for the previous 2 years, the fiscal 24 budget, and beyond fiscal 24. Who we are, our HR staff, these are our people. We did have one who was a little camera shy, so we did use our icon. Our new employee is Tim DeWolf, who is in the upper left. He is our new learning and development coordinator. And then we have our other staff who continue to work with us, including Ryan Casala, who is over right in the middle, celebrating his 3-year anniversary this month. The HR's mission statement supports the town of Brookline by focusing the efforts on the most valuable asset, its employees, providing leadership and guidance in the development, implementation, and equitable administration of policies and procedures, striving to attract, develop, and retain a diverse and productive workforce, and to strive and foster a positive work environment that inspires excellence in the service to our community. This is a copy of the Select Board's approved Brookline Code of Conduct. It is one of the things that Board Member Ashkenazi and I worked together on to present to the Select Board at the end of last year. Fiscal 22 and fiscal 23 activities, and really capturing this is beyond COVID. We continue to this day, and probably until the 11th of May, when the COVID emergency is officially ended, we still continue to do COVID contact tracing with our employees and provide them with resources on what they need to do and when to protect their family members and safely return to work, and what those things look like. I will say that HR is not usually a source of revenue for the town of Brookline, but in fiscal 23, we did return $97,000 to Brookline from the state as a result of the careful tracking of COVID time that was used, state COVID time that was used by our employees. So we were able to return $97,000 back to the town coffers. Most recently, we've coordinated the employment data and calculations for $5.8 million in premium pay to our employees. And we have successfully negotiated the library, engineers, and AFSCME main contracts in the last 2 years. We have updated and implemented a permanent work from home hybrid work program for eligible positions, and are currently conducting policy reviews of FMLA and parental leave, QUARI, technology policies, and the code of conduct with the HR board. Our current activities include onboarding Tim DeWolf, our new learning and development person, and getting him set up with what he needs. He is conducting a needs analysis and identifying the next steps in being able to provide learning and development to our employees to both improve themselves and move forward within our organization or somewhere else. We are eliminating paper forms and mailings around policies, and we will be shortly implementing the online compliance for both conflict of interest and town policies across all departments. And we have worked to do salary studies on non-union employees and the engineers as part of their collective bargaining agreement. And that work is ongoing as well. This is just a word picture of terms that tie into human resources, professional, compassionate, human, people being the biggest piece, rules, thoughtful, important, well-being, helpful benefits, among others. For the third section, just our fiscal 24 budget is not much change. We have a budget that increases $3,063. If there is an approved override, we would be putting that towards a learning management subscription, which is identified in the override column. So not really much to say about the changes in the fiscal 24 budget. And then benefits in 2024, just a general overview. We have names and plans have changed. That open enrollment starts tomorrow for health insurance, both for employees and retirees, and other benefits. The prescriptions will be moving to CVS Caremark. For retirees, there are changes as far as what plan you can be in based on where you live. Our IOD medical has increased costs and usage, and retirement and OPEB are returning to their regular funding schedule. And other benefits include our long-term disability. And I know that Melissa will provide more of a detailed overview of the benefits budget a little bit later. Beyond fiscal 24 and talking about the possibilities, really looking at what we would like to be doing. I was a budget and tax person before I was an HR person, so I know that the funding is never unlimited. So within that sort of idealistic goal, looking at what we would do. Starting with salaries, looking at salaries and benefit review, which we are starting that process to update for equity and competitiveness, focusing on recruiting and retention. Improving our talent status and where we can provide focused support would be where we would go next, through the life cycle of attracting and retaining employees. To do proactive recruiting. We have more recently been doing more contracted work to fill hard to fill positions. And I believe that a paid employee focused on talent and sourcing might be a better use of our funds across all of the departments and not just on these one or two specific positions. With the pass of the override, it would allow us to put in a web-based learning platform and provide additional resources to employee development, which would allow us to diversify our promotions and upskill our existing employees to move into their next career path or their next job. And then all of this really ties in, and you see the sort of larger bump up into employee engagement and really tying into people's avocation, not just a job, diverse teams, identifying hidden talents, and providing more visibility and focus on community service. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. Did you say that Melissa is going to talk about benefits?
I believe so. She has the slide for that. I can pull it up if I need to, but I know that Melissa has it, so.
Hello, everyone. I can share my screen and just run through the benefit budget very quickly. So the first item that we have is our pension system. We just did an actuarial assessment where we have a new funding schedule. Fortunately, it's the same funding schedule that we previously had, and we were still able to lower our rate of return to 6.9%. So that schedule requires $2.4 million appropriation or 8% increase, and we are still on track for a 2030 full funding. Group health, the GIC rates did come in, major changes in the GIC. So we are looking to have the open enrollment settle in before we make any adjustments to this budget. So the current schedule is an 8% assumption with 50 new enrollees. So that translates to $2.1 million increase or 6.1%. Once we are finished with open enrollment, we'll look at where all the employees have migrated that have, had their plans change, and then we'll provide a revised estimate for GIC group health. Retiree OPEB fund, we had paused the annual increases that we've been historically providing to the OPEB trust fund during COVID, and we were able to resume that in 23, and so we're able to keep that going in 24. that provides an additional $250,000 to the OPEB trust fund. Group life and disability have been level funded. It's just based on the current year's activity. Our workers' comp fund, we are looking to provide some additional funding because there's been some increased expenditures in the trust fund there. So we've got an additional $343,000 going to the workers' comp trust, or about 18.6% increase. We are level funding our public safety IOD, injured on duty medical expenses. That's $275,000. The balance in the unemployment compensation trust fund is pretty healthy. So we were able to reduce the appropriation need for that particular account. Obviously, that got redirected to workers' comp instead. And then our two medical disability and our Medicare payroll tax, those are also level funded based on the current expenditure levels as well.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the select board? John?
Melissa, thanks very much. Actually, this is a question for Ann. Earlier today, at a meeting of the audit committee, I heard Melissa recite a really astonishing record of the, just to sort of drive home a point about the turnover that there has been in key positions within Brookline Town Hall. She recited a number of positions in finance-related departments, and I'm wondering if we are tracking what happens to the positions that opened up and were not filled largely as a result of COVID. And can you give us a kind of a summation at this point as to what extent have we rebounded, and to what extent do we still have a significant number of positions to fill?
So COVID changed the value proposition for employment. And what that means is that the prioritization of what people are looking for when they spend time outside of their homes and outside of, the company of their families has changed in many ways. We have seen people leave positions for no next employment because they needed, time away, time to decompress, just whatever the reason. We've seen people change career paths. And we've seen people ghost us on the first day of work or during an interview, which pre-COVID didn't really happen. I've brought in previous employment reports to you, reports around the Great Resignation and people sort of doing the active quit, which doesn't tie in the numbers around quiet quitting, where people are just staying where they are and sort of treading water. That is still a significant challenge for us. We do track. Jennifer on my staff, who's the labor and employee relations person, is in charge of the jobs posting and some of the information that was provided to you regarding the compensation study, or the non-union compensation study is also true, where we've had positions that are they can be more or less technical, but we've had had to post them multiple times. We posted the assistant clerk position 3 times. We posted a position in IT 9 times. We've had buildings positions open for years and still can't fill them, and that's pre-COVID. So, those are in the technical or skilled trades around HVAC and things like that. Those things haven't changed. The change has really been in some of the other positions that were, I would say, in some ways easier to fill, where people are just, they sign up for an interview and don't show up, or we've had people go all the way through the background check process, where we do a query, to get people cleared to hire if they have to do a physical or a drug test if there are CDL, positions. And they do all of that, and we spend time and energy and costs on that. And then they decide they're not going to, actually come to the first day of work. And, that's all without discussing, policing, right? And that we know is at a higher level for a variety of reasons. But, we're seeing some rebound, but it really is us in HR, among others, looking at what are we offering for folks to want to come work for us or work with us. And it's not just pension, and it's not just health insurance. Those are part of the factors, but what folks are looking at is flexibility, work from home, hybrid work. More often than not, that's the first question out of the gate for some folks in, their initial inquiry into positions. And so really looking at what are we offering, what are we highlighting as an employer for both recruiting employees and retaining them. And I will say we've been very fortunate of late that we've actually done quite a few internal promotions, and some from a non-traditional source. Our new assistant town clerk is someone who worked in public works beforehand. And so not a, a direct line career path that one would imagine. And then we've seen promotions within, John, you talked about the finance.
Finance.
We've seen a lot of promotions within that, and also some, I'll call it swapping. So, we sort of stole Mike D'Onofrio from schools to have him be the public safety business office manager. We had a public safety business office position go over to the comptroller's office. We had a comptroller position internally promoted to a higher level position. And so there are a lot of moving pieces and rationales for why people are making different choices that are not as easy to discern.
Thanks.
Any other questions from the select board? Okay. Thank you, Ann. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, we have the library. And I see a couple librarians coming up to the podium. Yes.
After this, I have something that a resident sent that he wanted to have read during the discussion about hybrid meetings, and I wonder if I could just take the 30 seconds to read that.
Sure. Do you want to do it
After this?
after this?
Yeah, these folks have been here for a while.
There's only one librarian.
Okay, I meant library folks.
She's Amanda Hurst. I think you know Amanda.
Yes.
For the record, I'm Jonathan Margolis. I am the vice chair of the Board of Library Trustees. And tonight I am playing the part of Michael Burstein, the chair.
You look just like him.
John's a method actor.
And you talk like someone who has a really good job, librarian, as opposed to lawyer that you are.
So Devin, how do I access my presentation? Go to screen share for Zoom. This is someone's email that's up right now. Oh, is it yours?
Well, while you are doing that, I need to say something real quick.
Sure.
I had a little family emergency last week at the library, and Amanda was absolutely unbelievably helpful and stayed after hours to search for a missing phone that belonged to my son that was stolen. So I cannot thank you enough. I really, really cannot thank you enough. We did not find the phone. It ended up in Brighton, and the police told us to write it off. But I just appreciate all your time and effort.
Sure thing.
And now you know how to open the lock.
Yes, I do. So, good evening. Again, thank you for having me tonight. Jonathan introduced himself as the vice chair of our trustees, but I'd also like to recognize Dr. Kristen Hung, who is here with us as well. Another one of our library trustees, and I'm sure that we have a number of trustees who are also viewing this meeting on Zoom. So thank you all for attending. Again, I'm Amanda Hurst, your Director of Libraries. So to start off, we'll just talk a little bit about the library itself. We have three locations: our Coolidge Corner, Brookline Village, and Putterham. We circulate over 1 million items, both print and electronic resources, and we're the third busiest library in the Minuteman network after Cambridge and Newton. We have 42,000 registered borrowers, and our services include a library of things, tool library, and museum and park passes that are available for checkout. We have an English language learning program, as well as story times, book clubs, Girls Who Code, all of the things you'd expect a public library to offer. We have had 13,000 plus program attendees at hundreds of library programs, both in person and online. When we're talking about the library's biggest accomplishments for FY23, I think three really stand out to me. And first is both our Putterham and Coolidge locations are exceeding 2019 pre-COVID checkout levels. So our patrons are back and they are demanding materials, and we love that. The data provided to us on this is through the Minuteman network. We have conducted a diversity audit of our library's print collection. Representation matters, and we're able to ensure that our collections and future purchasing align with Brookline's changing demographics. Our book vendor, Ingram, analyzed our collections for us and provided a comparison of libraries of similar size. And the Public Library of Brookline consistently scored higher than our peer libraries. So I'm very proud of that. We've also increased engagement to Brookline's older adult population with online and in-person programming. We're a frequent partner of the Council on Aging. And as an example, one of our most favored programs with our older adults is a gentle chair yoga that our friends fund with Keith Beasley. And that regularly exceeds our attendance expectations, both in person and online. So before I talk about our goals for FY24, I just want to mention that the library is funded. Actually, I'm very excited about our FY24 budget. We will be funded at a level that meets our municipal appropriation requirement. And so in addition to that, we'll be funding our library collections at 12%. And what this does is allows the library to receive its full award of state aid. This budget also is not dependent on an override. So we're in really great shape with that. And then our goals for FY24 are to support K through 12 education and lifelong learning, focusing on two key areas: STEAM, which is an acronym that stands for science, technology, engineering, the arts, and math, as well as literacy. We plan to partner with community organizations to increase the reach of library collections, programs, and services, especially to those who are unfamiliar with what the library is and does. We have been engaging with a consultant, and so for FY24, we'll be able to implement a library-wide strategy for racial equity that will include deliberate practices of inclusion, both within the organization and in our collections, programs, and services, as well as increase opportunities for citizens to engage with library staff, collections, and programs without having to visit a library. So how will we measure our success? I'm a big fan of alignment. And so I want everything that we're doing in the library to align with our annual goals. So for every program, service, or outreach we do, it will either be tied to our FY24 action items, and there will be a direct line to one of our FY24 goals. In addition to that, we will I plan on introducing an evaluation process as well as outcome-based program planning. So we have intention around everything that we do at the library. And so you asked if we had any new initiatives, and I'm very excited to report that the library will be engaging in outreach and mobile services. We requested funding through an ARPA grant request in round 2 that was part of the town's package, as well as receiving additional funding from the Friends of the Brookline Library and the Brookline Library Foundation to support this new initiative. So the library outreach vehicle is fully electric, or will be fully electric. Ford makes a fully electric vehicle, a chassis that they can build a bookmobile around. Bookmobiles allow us to meet the community needs for both traditional and new services. It will increase services to those who can't come to the library, and it reaches out to those who are underserved. And it also provides equitable services to all residents of Brookline. So examples of ways bookmobiles meet community needs is by visiting Head Start programs, subsidized daycares, senior and low income housing, community food banks, after school programs, senior and community events, farmers markets, and just anything else that might be happening in the community. It gives the library a mobile partnership tool by providing citizens with a way to engage with staff, collections, and programs conveniently in places where people already are. And lastly, it will provide a tool for delivery of library materials to those who are homebound due to age, ability, or other factors. Another neat feature of this bookmobile is that it will be fully accessible. So those in a wheelchair, it can still come on board. There will be a lift gate that can bring people up and onto the vehicle. So related to personnel, our personnel has for FY24 will stay static. I just want to mention that the most important asset of any library goes home at night, and that's the library staff. So we have 41 full-time staff members. We are in the process of rehiring some of our vacant full-time positions. And this year we repackaged one of our assistant director roles for technology into a library technology support specialist. So that person will be focusing primarily on IT. The library has hundreds of pieces of technology, and we need an in-house IT staff to support that. In addition to our full-time personnel, we also have 31 part-time staff members at the library. So our no limits budget priority, I think in the practical sense, I identified 3 areas. One would be personnel, where we would fund an assistant director for public services. The library already has an assistant director for administration, and typically the libraries are organized by administration and public services. So this would be our counterpart to the assistant director for administration role. Under technology, we would invest in software and equipment that will allow us to gain efficiencies in materials handling and workflow processes. So as I mentioned before, we're circulating hundreds of thousands of physical materials. And so to figure out or to purchase technology that helps us handle materials less would allow us to, or allow our staff to be more available to patrons, conduct outreach, and develop new programs and services. In regards to our buildings, I'm very interested in funding a sustainability strategic planning process with the goal of our libraries becoming carbon neutral. And we have received several requests from the public to install gender neutral bathrooms at Brookline Village. But thinking in terms of no limits budget priority in a grander sense, something like that would allow the Public Library of Brookline to be a leader in our field. We would be able to continue to hire and retain top talent, cultivate a position and reputation with name and brand recognition, and then become known for innovative approaches to programs and services, have state-of-the-art facilities, as well as recognition for our leadership and expertise in the library field. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
I just to say, Library Lion just brings back so many memories. I must have read that book 1,000 times to my child.
Good.
Rawr.
Mike.
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, you had one slide in here that showed, goals and actions, that graphic. That's a wonderful graphic from the perspective. Just a mindset that gives you that resulted in that graphic that's great. I really applaud that. We have to do we have done some work and we have to do more of it in terms of making sure that our own goals align with the budget and and the other things that we're doing. I do have one question about technology, and you mentioned adding changing the definition of one of the jobs, and what you would do if there were unlimited funds would be add some more technology support. How much integration is there with the IT department in terms of purchasing, in terms of getting strategic support? I realize that day-to-day support is probably something you want to do internally.
Well, yes. So actually, all of Town Hall is very supportive of library endeavors. So for example, we are in the process of negotiating like a print management system that we use with our patrons who have the ability to print on demand from our computers for a small fee. And Town IT and our purchasing department, because we don't have anyone in that key technology role, the library have been very supportive of helping us sort of navigate the contracts around those leases and service agreements. Additionally, we have one member of Town IT staff who provides the bulk of support to libraries. So we have that personal connection with IT staff, as well as at the director level between myself and
Okay, good. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. to that.
Very.
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of the things we talk to IT a lot about is cybersecurity. So are they also helping you with, like, is that an issue with the library? I mean, imagine it is,
yes,
right?
because we allow anyone off the street to come in and use our computer, and they can click on whatever they like. So yes, we do have IT support with that as well. For example, right now, one of our servers is needing replacement, and because they think that it is at a point where it could be compromised. So they're working with us and our vendors to ensure that we have the technology infrastructure that's safe and secure.
That's a really interesting point. Do you have an air gap? Are the public computers gapped?
I think that, yeah, they're isolated.
Okay, there's an air gap. Okay, good.
John.
Having previously expressed thanks for my part in the Council on Aging work, I also want to thank John Margolis, and I'd be thanking Michael if he were here, for being invited into the process that led to the hiring of Amanda. And I want to thank you for choosing Brookline, because you came along at a time when we needed you. So it's a little bit late to be saying welcome to Brookline, but it sounds like you're already proving that Brookline made a very good choice.
Thank you.
And Michael, we want to thank you for your participation, which was very valuable.
Michael or John? Although I'm sure Michael has done
some
wonders.
resemblance.
That's okay,
And
John.
You are John also. You
Now,
may
John
want to
was-
introduce yourself to our TV audience.
Those two, I'd be a little more worried.
I just ask questions and use Canopy, which.
Yeah.
But I also want to add, I love my job and I love being part of this town. So it's been just such a great experience. It's only been 6.5, 7 months. And yeah, this has just been fantastic.
We need to hear that every now and then. So thank you.
Well, I'm going to say one more thing, which is, I just think you're exactly what we needed at the right time. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So Bernard, is this an appropriate time for me to interrupt and try to read this statement, or do you want?
Wait.
We had a request from the Q&A to close out the presentation. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I beg your pardon.
There we go. All good. Thank you. Now go ahead.
Okay. So not related to the library.
It's completely separate.
Okay.
It goes back to the discussion about hybrid.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Hurst and maybe John? No?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I confess that I actually looked at my email during the meeting and got an email from Jerry Tuckman, who asked me to read this this statement. This board, that is addressed to us, has failed to properly and adequately discharge its duties by failing to follow up on overwhelming town vote seeking hybrid town meeting by creating a plan for its implementation if and when state approval was received. Further, it ignored legitimate information that hybrid town meetings were likely to be allowed and failing to wait an additional week in issuing its in-person warrant for the spring 2023 town meeting. The town has separately run in-person and remote meetings before. It should be capable of holding a hybrid town meeting this spring, which would allow it to be accessible to all elected town meeting members. A strictly in-person meeting will prevent a number of those members from attending for a variety of reasons, depriving precinct constituents of their chosen representatives. There are a number of important articles to be discussed and voted on. If you reject the call for a hybrid town meeting this spring, you should at least explore any and every possibility of having non-attending town meeting members be able to attend by Zoom or monitor the meeting and vote by phone. And that last suggestion is a good one. We've certainly been able to do that with remote town meetings. We should be able to do that for people who have reasonable, need for reasonable accommodation.
We still can't do that.
Yeah.
Again, the problem is with a reasonable accommodation, unfortunately, right, is what's provided by law. And if you call an in-person town meeting, you can't authorize by law voting by phone, which is, it's just the unfortunate reality.
Which is different from what we do at the select board.
Yep.
We can have a member of the select board.
Right,
or the
hybrid
audience
meeting,
call in by phone.
Yeah.
Which we did before the pandemic, but it's not something that's authorized for a town meeting.
Okay.
Unless I'm wrong, town council?
Okay. No, okay. Take it back. Sorry, Jerry. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, next, warrant articles, public hearings. Let's start off, and this is a public hearing scheduled for 6:15. We apologize for missing that time, but that's what happens.
Life happens.
I would be shocked if Chi thought she was actually going to come up here at 6:15.
Okay, first of all, warrant article 13, create a new article 13A of the town's general bylaws to establish an office of housing stability. Okay.
Hi, good evening. We have a PowerPoint presentation. I think you know me, but I'm Chi Wu, town meeting member in precinct 7.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Card. I am a renter in Brookline. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm excited to be presenting this warrant article in front of you for an Office of Housing Stability. In my personal life, I have lived here for several years with my partner and my chosen family, and I hope to continue living here for many more. In my professional life, I am a lawyer at the Center for Health Law and Policy Innovation at Harvard Law School. My background is in housing law, working with people with disabilities and building LGBTQ communities. So first, I'm going to go over some of the broader context of our warrant article, and then I will toss it over to my co-petitioner, Chi-Chi, as soon as I figure out how to move this. There we go. All right, so it is indisputable that our nation is in the midst of a housing crisis. And we're feeling it here in Massachusetts as well. Renters are facing issues and accessing and staying in safe, affordable, and stable housing. Faced with peaking rents, low housing stock, and the effects of the pandemic, renters are increasingly at risk of displacement and housing instability. Not only is displacement a dehumanizing and often rigorous process for renters, it is deeply related to the health and well-being of our community and its members. People experiencing housing instability are often forced to prioritize financial goals over their own well-being. One example highlighted here demonstrates that cost-burdened households are more likely to forego medical care and more likely to report poorer health. But this is a threat for more stakeholders than just renters. Poorer health outcomes are associated with negative mental and physical health outcomes, as I just discussed, but they also in turn into reliance on acute care services, which is often costly for town programs. We know that we are in the midst of dealing with historical rates of burnout and capacity limits for support services in the social safety networks. It's also costly to landlords to have to go through the eviction process. We know that our courts are dealing with a record number of evictions, and oftentimes many of these housing issues can be resolved by a mediated process. It doesn't require the courts. Not only is this an issue of public health, but it's also an issue of racial inequity. So as you can see up here, 1 in 6 renters were not caught up on rent during the pandemic, with renters of color facing greatest hardship. And in the greater Boston area, put simply, rent is just too darn high. We know that increasing rent hikes are going to force people into situations that likely cause displacement. And it honestly feels like there's no end in sight. Moreover, to reinforce that this is going to disproportionately affect BIPOC renters, we know that not only are BIPOC renters more likely to be cost burdened, but they're more likely to be severely cost burdened, meaning that they are spending more than 30% of their income on housing alone. Lastly, if you take a look at this eviction lab report from Suffolk County, it shows that we are seeing an increase in evictions over time. These evictions are very difficult for folks to go through. I have walked a number of tenants through the process myself. It is often traumatizing. It has incredible mental health effects, and ultimately it's dehumanizing. I'm going to toss it over to Chi-Chi to talk about some of the more local aspects of this.
So as a part of the greater Boston region, the issues that John described affect Brookline and affect Brookline greatly. As you probably know on the select board, but a lot of folks may have not realized, our community's households are actually majority renter. 52% of households in Brookline are renters, and that's a bigger percentage than Newton or Lexington and even Watertown and Arlington. And our rents are skyrocketing too, as you can see. And these are all charts from the Housing Production Plan's draft report that came out a few weeks ago. And our rents are going up, straight up to trajectory with a slight dip in 2020. As a result of these rent hikes, we have a lot of cost burden and severely cost burden renters. Like the rest of the greater Boston region, over 40% of our renters are cost burdened, and a stunning 24% are severely cost burdened, paying more than 50% of their income on rent. And when you think of that's 1 in 4 renters who are 1 in 2 households, that's a lot of folks in Brookline. And let me give you just a sort of an anecdotal or a personalized illustration of what this looks like in Brookline. Some of you are on that very energetic list Facebook page called the Brookline Townwide Discussion Facebook page. And you probably have seen these posts, I definitely have, of renters appealing for help, appealing for, is there a unit out there we can move into? We have to leave our unit. We've been here 9 years because the company that owns it wants to renovate and jack up the rent. And that's sort of the human cost of this rental housing crisis in Brookline. So other municipalities in the greater Boston region have responded to this crisis in rental housing by creating offices of housing stability. Boston was the first in 2016. But you might think, okay, well, that's Boston, they can afford that. But if you look, there are municipalities that are our size or slightly bigger that also have done this. Somerville, which has about the same budget as us and 20,000 more folks, they have an office with 9 staff. It's pretty amazing. Malden, about the same size as us, 2/3 of our budget, created an office this year. Revere, smaller than us, smaller budget, opened its office in 2020. So all of these offices inspired us to create a warrant article. Warrant Article 13 to create an Office of Housing Stability. The warrant article spells out the mission: assist residents at risk of displacement, prevent homelessness, develop initiatives to combat displacement, and serve as a resource and clearinghouse of information. The warrant article also lists potential services an Office of Housing Stability could provide, like advice and information, referrals, accessing financial assistance, advocacy or mediation with landlords or housing agencies, case management, housing search. These are potential services. We wrote the article deliberately to be flexible. We've heard some criticism that, oh, this isn't ready for prime time. You haven't spelled out specifics. We need a study committee. This was done deliberately to make it flexible because it would leave it up to the town administrator and you, the select board, to flesh out what the office would look like. The warrant article suggests it would be in the public health department, but it's up to the town administrator if the town administrator wants to put it in the planning department. And the flexibility allows the town administrator and the select board to choose among models or to adapt practices from other municipalities. We don't need a study committee to reinvent the wheel. The city of Somerville has given us its business plan for its Office of Housing Stability and said it's fine to share with Brookline. We have here the city of Malden's request for proposals. They went with a model of contracting with a nonprofit that has housing special expertise. And so they put out an RFP and they've shared that with us too. So we have lots of models and experience from other municipalities we can rely upon. Do you have any questions? Or is there, we go with public comment first?
I'm sorry, go with what first?
It's a public hearing. She wants to know if we do the public hearing.
Oh,
comment.
okay, sorry, didn't hear you. No, but let's have questions from the select board. I'd like to ask if you've talked to our health director regarding programs within that department that maybe already cover some of the things that you're talking about in this proposal. I mean, there are a lot of housing programs, resources, both in the health department as well as, or through the health department, as well as other institutions around town.
So we have had a conversation with the public health director as well as the town administrator about this Office of Housing Stability. And we understand that the health department is sort of going through a mapping analysis of where social services are in town, whether they be within the town itself or within nonprofits. And one of the goals of an Office of Housing Stability is to be a point office for all of this, because there are services that are kind of scattered throughout. You have the Council on Aging, which helps older Brookliners with housing issues. You have the Veterans Office to help veterans, but obviously those two offices only help one subset of the population. You have nonprofits that provide rental assistance. But what you need is someone who can help a renter navigate all of that. So when they are behind in rent, they have someone to help them guide through the process and advocate for them. I don't know if you wanted to add something, John.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say that regardless of what is already in place, having somebody with housing expertise is a capacity building tool, right? These services are already serving these populations, much like you've discussed. But I guarantee that they would benefit from being able to contact an office that can speak about housing issues, that can talk about approaching it from a non-adversarial point of view that's focused on, actually maintaining relationships between tenants and landlords, and with the knowledge of what exactly the law requires.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I'm concerned that we're duplicating some of the things that may be already in place, and that the future plans of, for example, the health department may not align with a housing office right now. So it's just a point. Mike?
Yeah, so a couple things. One is, I assume that this requires an additional staff member, because looking at or at least it requires some portion of a full-time equivalent. And of course, we hear from time to time that, gee, we've added staff members over time. But we're doing that in response to requests like this from the public. So I wonder if you can give us a sense of how much time do you think this would involve? And then the other question I have is whether you've talked to the Brookline Community Foundation, which has a very active safety net program that was basically built around providing people with help when they were behind in rent or needed a deposit or something of that sort. Because as it's sort of a follow-up to what Bernard has said, there are services in town. You make a very good point that they're not centralized, but I wonder whether it would be better to centralize them there rather than in the health department.
So with respect to the number of positions that such an office would have, we did not specify that in the warrant article because the last time I wrote an article that specified a position, I was taken to task about doing that and tying the hands of the town administrator. And so I promised I would not do that this time.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it, but I mean, there must take, I think you recognize that it does take some time, any sense at all of what's required to actually do this.
I mean, you could start off with one person who would serve as the clearinghouse function, the gathering all the information, the putting the information together, the developing of the brochures, making referrals. It's a social services function, which is why something like I talk to the Brookline Community Foundation on a regular basis, but not about this specifically, but they're not set up to be a social services provider because it's more than just giving the money. I mean, it's helping mediate, it's telling tenants about their rights, it's telling them what resources are available. If it's a conditions issue, maybe helping them navigate with inspectional services. If you want to add anything to that.
I can just say that I had the privilege of working with the Boston Office of Housing Stability back in 2016 when they were opening. And at that time, it was a staff of 3. And just as a staff of 3 for the entire city of Boston, they were able to put together a resource eviction guide. They were able to do exactly what Chi-Chi's talking about, pull together the resources and start to identify what sort of pressure points Boston needed to address their housing crisis.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Mary?
Well, I'll let John go first.
Fine. That's fine. So thank you for what you've done. I think that really what, from my point of view, what we're facing here is a fundamental question of if there are people in Brookline who need some kind of place to turn for assistance with a housing problem, or whether presumably housing in an apartment housing problem. They're worried about eviction. They're having trouble making payments on their rent. They have a problem landlord, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Do they have resources that they can turn to in Brookline? And I think one of the things that Brookline suffers from is often it turns out there are places that they can turn to for help, but they're not clearly identified as they would be, say, in Somerville, where there is an office of housing and rental assistance. We can address that, and maybe that should be the first question that is asked and answered on the way towards trying to respond to the very significant questions that Chi-Chi and John have raised. But I think we need to first kind of figure out what do we offer. Because I know of things, for example, and I did mention this when you presented to, I think it was the CDICR, that the Brookline Community Mental Health Center, which we spoke of earlier tonight because of their connection to Team Brookline, has something called, their housing and basic needs services. And I frankly don't know if they are under any kind of contractual arrangement or if a contractual arrangement with Brookline Town Hall is necessary. But you mentioned Malden, doing what Somerville does, but more or less through a contractual arrangement. So that would be a good place to maybe start the examination of where do people turn right now in Brookline and what services can they get? And if it is in part provided by the Brookline Community Mental Health Center, is it also in part provided by other entities? And my research then led me to the fact that we have someone in our planning department who actually put together a resource guide for people, with housing issues and housing problems. So how does that intersect with all of this? I have a feeling that there's probably a fair amount of activity that goes on through the police department since they come into contact with people in the streets. And I know that they want to do the follow-up, and I know that they have a social worker who, works within the police department. So I kind of get the picture of Brookline maybe is doing some, and maybe even most of what you're hoping to do through this Office of Assistance, but we just haven't had the occasion when we said, how exactly do we do it? How do these parts mesh? And can we do a better job of making it transparent to somebody who comes to the Brookline Town website that where those resources lie and how to connect to those resources quickly, readily. CDICR is another one. They deal with complaints about landlords that are violating housing statutes, the federal housing laws. So it is, there's a lot there, kind of scattered, maybe needs to be studied so that we can update exactly how it all fits together and then put it together in some kind of a transparent package and then figure out, do we still need 1, 2, 3 staff members added under a departmental heading, at town hall? Just a reaction to, on my part, to that, the problem you've raised. And I thank you for raising that, or the challenge you've raised. I'll call it that.
I guess my concern with what you've described here is that many of those services are specialized, right? And many of them are dealing with issues much further down the line. So let's say that we're talking about the Brookline Mental Health nonprofit. They are at the point of working with somebody who is already in a mental health crisis or facing a mental health crisis or dealing with mental health issues, right? Or if we're talking about the Council on Aging, they're restricted to working with folks within that age group. There's not actually a resource just for tenants. And tenants face issues well before they're dealing with any sort of like specialized thing. So, right, we need a resource that tenants can turn to, especially, students such as myself. I was a student in undergrad and law school dealing with housing instability issues. And at no point was I necessarily relying on social support services, but I did need help with housing and understanding what my rights were, how to speak to my landlord, how to resolve issues. And so in what you've described, I agree, there are support services out there, but I can't necessarily name one that is specifically focused on tenants as a broad group and population in this town.
Are you at all concerned that we could get into a lot of I'm going to say the word wrong, duplication of services?
So when I spoke with the director of the Somerville Office of Housing Stability, and I said, well, given Brookline's budget, that we may only be able to afford, 1 staff person. She said the most important role is this clearinghouse of information role, is assembling all of this, putting it in public facing forms that are easily accessible, language accessible, because 1 in 10 residents,
sure.
Primary language is not English. So what you've done is the start of what someone would do, but it goes way beyond that. And then there's the mediation role, which, obviously isn't just information gathering. One comment we got about this is, well, why can't the librarians do this? Well, it's because they're not housing specialists, and we need a housing specialist to help folks.
And
Yeah. All right. So first, I apologize because I have lots in my head that I really need to get out. So I'm going to try to organize my thoughts. The first thing I have to say is thank you. This is very timely and very important because I get a lot of emails on these issues, and it's very frustrating for me as a select board member to not be able to help constituents in this town. And as you said, 52% of which are renters. So I think this is important. I think the way you have done it is the right way. One of the things I struggle with generally with our process of town meeting and AC and select board is you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? You're damned if you write the position in. And if you don't write the position in, why didn't you write the position in? We've had this conversation as a select board before. If people don't agree with the warrant article, they find ways around the process for whatever reason. I'm not saying that's what what's happening here necessarily, but I feel the need to point that out. The other thing that really strikes me is something that happens a lot because I'm a disabled myself. I get a lot of emails about people who need help with issues of disability discrimination. And one of the best things that I do is send them to Sarah Kaplan. Sarah, I have a solution for you. Let me put you in touch with Sarah. And it's really amazing to me how often Sarah can help resolve something because she's a disability expert. I'm not actually a disability expert. I don't even play one on TV. And as you're talking, what really strikes me is that there's a great analogy for this in the medical field. We have a lot of problems in medicine where the resources exist and nobody, the patient, and half the time the doctor or the nurse doesn't know how to access them or doesn't know they exist. They're in many disparate places. And I find super fascinating is all three of you have described exactly the problem they're trying to fix with this warrant article. All three of you have said, well, but we have this resource and we have that resource and we have this resource, but we don't have a Sarah Kaplan. We don't have one person for people to go to say, okay, here's my problem. And that person can say, great, we have this resource, or we have that resource, or I'm going to send you to that way, or here's something maybe we need to address. Mm-hmm. To me, that's what this is. And when you say clearinghouse, that's exactly how I think about it. I think the flexibility is important. It's up for Jazz. Jazz can hire one person to start. And that one person, that's their job to figure out what we have, where we have it, how to work with everyone, where the gaps are. I don't think we need to study it. I think we need a hired housing expert because it's really clearly a problem. I mean, how many times have we discussed these issues? Hancock Village folks, like we need this for us, frankly. Yeah. So I really applaud you. I really appreciate it. I really hope we can move forward with this. Yeah. I don't have any questions.
Yeah. Since I'm one of the three that you referred to.
I mean, it wasn't
and I didn't take it that way either. But my concern is not with the idea, because I think it's a good idea. But I suggested to Chaz that we look at a system in Chelsea called the Chelsea Hub. Where basically a roundtable. I mean, it's a little different from what we would want to do here in Brookline, but a roundtable that identifies problems that individuals have, and together figure out what are the resources out there in the community that we can bring to that person. And so my concern is that maybe the health director is actually developing the type of structure that would address the issues that you're talking about, which is why I asked if you'd talk to her. I think the idea is good, but it maybe should be part of a broader initiative than just housing, because housing just
social work. Sorry, I'm sorry.
No, not a Department of Social Work, but our Public Health and Social Services Department, right? So that was my concern, and I'm not opposing this idea. I just want to make sure that it's sort of part of our ongoing effort to figure out how best to pull together the incredible amount of resources we have available in this town into a coherent system that can address problems. So this is a public hearing, by the way. Does anyone else have any questions, or could we open it up to the public?
Thank you.
The first person signed up for public comment is Bonnie Bastian. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute, share your video if you're comfortable, and your 3 minutes will begin.
Bonnie Bastian. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 5. I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank Chi-Chi Wu and John Card for drafting this warrant article with their deep expertise. I have been a renter in Brookline for over 20 years. I am also situated in the category, in the cost burden category in Brookline. And last summer, my rent was raised $800 over a 4-month period. And, I don't care who you are, if, $800 is a whole lot of money. I've had a lot of struggle trying to get my landlord to make critical repairs to my home for the entire relationship, my entire relationship with my landlord. We've been struggling with this. And what I needed was advice, was strategy, and information to help me understand where my points of leverage are with my very specific rental arrangement, to be able to communicate with my landlord to get these repairs done that affect my family's health, that are health code violations. They affect mine and my partner's level of stress and enormous anxiety. We needed a way to address the issue with my landlord in a way that was effective and wouldn't risk getting kicked out of my home. That is very, very specific information. And where I was able to get it was from a friend that is a tenant rights lawyer, from an expert. I wasn't able to get it at the Brookline Community Center.
You
I
have 30
wasn't able to
seconds.
get it at the health center. We do have resources here, but I would very strongly challenge the phrase an incredible amount of resources. We do not have an incredible amount of resources for renters struggling. One might be able to get $1,000 from the Brookline Community Center with their safety net program. But I know that people are often turned away because $1,000 actually won't impact the fact that they are very close to getting evicted. They were
You've reached 3 minutes.
They were denied $1,000 of assistance because they owed way too much. And that money would only be accessible once a year. So we need help. We need very direct help. We need information. We need advice. We need someone who is dedicated to this. There's so much to say here, and this is just a critical need. And if the issue is money, let's say that, instead of trying to say that we already have these resources. Let's talk about this idea and how we can make it happen, because it is critically necessary. Just as Miriam said, you have all pointed it out yourself, that exactly what we want to happen here is what is being proposed. We have resources here.
You've reached 4 minutes.
Together. Yes, let's bring them all together and add expertise, housing expertise, so people like me and people in way worse scenarios in this town of enormous, crazy high rent can get some help. And I dare say it will also save you some money, because those people are the ones that become food insecure, and they have mental health issues and other crises that cause them to need other resources. I'm sorry I went over time, but this is so important to me and to so many of your constituents. Thank you.
Next person signed up for public comment is Scott Ananian. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and your 3 minutes will begin.
Thank you. C. Scott Ananian, town meeting member, precinct 10. Good evening to you all. Sorry I can't be there in person. Thank you for your service to the town and for caring about the well-being of our community. I have one main exhortation I'd like to give, and it's this: don't be afraid to do the right thing. I think John Van Scoya correctly, said the first step is to look at what the town is already doing and catalog it. Now, wouldn't it be great if there was a town staff person who would work on doing exactly that, who is passionate about housing and knowledgeable about how the pieces work together? You mentioned that there may be someone in planning who's already started to work on the issue, who perhaps is passionate and knowledgeable. So don't be afraid to support this warrant article. Create the department, staff it with a quarter or a half of an FTE at the start if you must. Find those folks in town who care about this issue and unleash them to do this work. So it's not something they're doing in addition to their usual job. Make it their actual job. I strongly suspect that once you get the ball rolling, the worth of the position will prove itself and the office may grow. But the article is open-ended. Don't be afraid to do the right thing and get this started. Your commitment is very low. It's just a matter of enough courage to say, yes, this is an important problem and someone in town should be working on it as their actual job. You can juggle the staffing, you can juggle the org chart. You are, after all, the select board. But this article is asking you to simply acknowledge that this is something the town staff should be working on, not in their spare time or in addition to their usual job, but as their actual job, directed by the town administrator and select board, because it is important to this select board and to our town. Thank you.
The next person signed up for public comment is Carolyn Thal. You've been promoted to a panelist. Your 3 minutes will begin when you're ready.
Thank you. I apologize for not being prepared because I'm sorry to say I haven't been as aware of this as I should be. Maybe because I have just been so sickeningly discouraged by trying to advocate for tenants, specifically at Hancock Village, which is in the precinct where I'm a town meeting member. So thank you, Jonathan Card, and thank you for speaking with our mutual friend the other day. That was incredibly helpful. Thank you, Chi Chi. Yes to everything Bonnie said, yes to everything Scott said. This doesn't live in the health department right now. This, God knows, does not live on the website right now. There needs to be a central dedicated person that can deal with anything from code enforcement, safety and health violations. And then when people are being evicted or non-renewed. Thank you, Miriam Ashkenazi, for responding to my email on Friday when I had to email you to tell you that 2 Baker parents have been non-renewed, not evicted. They pay their rent. They're being falsely non-renewed by Chestnut Hill Realty in Hancock Village. One is the president of the PTO of Baker School. She has a 9-year-old child with high needs. He has a one-on-one. They moved to Brookline for services. Excuse me, I'm going to turn off my camera. She's being non-renewed. She did nothing wrong. She thought they sent the letter to the wrong person because it didn't describe her or her family. I have another person I've been working with closely, and she has tried desperately to get attention and support from staff in town for things that are legitimate problems and concerns and complaints. She is a professional. She is a property manager herself. She is a single mother of a child at the Baker School. On Friday, she was served 30 days, get out. The day before, she received an email from the public schools of Brookline telling her that she needed to confirm her residency because somebody from Chestnut Hill Realty called in an anonymous, or maybe not anonymous, tip because they had planned to non-renew her and push her out. When I spoke to her on Friday night, she told me, I feel a little better because I vomited. This is a need. I don't know what else to say. And it needs to be a person, an omnibus person, a central person with spokes going out. Thank you to everybody who's working on this. And please, please move this forward.
At this time, there are 16 virtual attendees and 1 in person. No one has used the hand raise or Q&A feature to indicate they'd like, oh, there is a hand raise. I'm promoting Jessica Ryan. Hi, Jessica. You've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable. Your 3 minutes will begin.
Yes, good evening, and thank you for your time and your opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm gonna probably surprise many people when I speak to the benefits tonight of having a Office of Housing Stability and how that in fact benefits landlords. There are oftentimes, as a landlord, as a property manager by profession, where we find ourselves or our staff or our team members in situations where they're overwhelmed and they are not acting in a capacity to truly serve the tenant or the individual that is in need of service. And oftentimes these property managers or my own team members aren't in a position where they're qualified to handle these issues. And sometimes we reach out to, in other municipalities, to, as a landlord, we reach out to an Office of Housing Stability for assistance, for help. I've learned that there are mechanisms and acts that I needed to do in order to trigger services for an individual. I can share an example of somebody that became a hoarder. And do we evict this individual? They're endangering it's a fire safety. What I learned from the Office of Housing Stability in Boston was the legal letter that I needed to serve this person as a responsible landlord, which would trigger the services that they then need. This is overwhelming for your staff today, and not all of them, in my experience, are capable of handling their normal duties as well as their duties acting as an Office of Housing Stability. We are behind the ball here in Brookline, and this is an opportunity to deliver on the basics that your tenants need and the basics that your landlords need and property owners need as well. It is a service that goes both ways and will benefit your staff enormously. Thank you.
At this time, there are 16 virtual attendees and 1 in person. No one is using the hand raise or Q&A feature to indicate they'd like to make a comment.
Okay, any further discussion from the select board?
I just say, I am absorbing everything that has been said, and I want to actually repeat something which I hope I made a point of saying when I first addressed the sponsors of the article, and that is thank you. Sometimes select board meetings are more than just select board meetings, and sometimes it turns out that because someone has come to us and brought our attention on an issue that they can see has been an unmet need. It takes putting it out in front of the public via the select board meeting to suddenly discover that there are people who are waiting in line to validate this concern in the most stark terms. And so this has been an improvement in my knowledge of the situation. I know for a fact, because I've worked with Chaz for a while, I think he's absorbing all of this and going to give a lot of thought to how we respond to this in terms of what this means in terms of whether there is to be an additional staff person added or whether there's someone within the staff who needs to be elevated and given this as their sole responsibility. But one way or another, I think we heard enough evidence tonight to convince us that we don't have what we need now and we need something better. And I look forward to hearing what that something better might be. So thank you again.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, warrant Article 16, right? Amendment to zoning bylaws of the town to create a new zoning district to reduce the number of demolitions in Brookline. Introduced by the Planning and Community Development Department. Do we have Kara Bruton?
Polycelco.
Polycelco, okay.
Good evening. I'm Polly Selko. I'm the Assistant Director of Regulatory Planning. And the Planning Department has proposed a warrant Article 16. And it really is in response to the resolution that was passed at our last town meeting, where there was great concern about demolitions, especially in the T5 districts. T5 stands for two family, and 5 for 5,000 square foot lot sizes. You can see the map is on the screen, and you can see that these areas are north of Beacon and they're around Harvard Street. They're not on Harvard Street per se, but they're near Harvard Street. Most of these properties currently have an FAR of approximately between 0.5 and 0.7, but they're allowed to have an FAR of 1. So if a lot is 10,000 square feet, the house could be 10,000 square feet. And that leads to very large structures. And what's been happening in these neighborhoods is that there have been demolitions. Developers have been tearing down the houses and building 3 stories of a house at an FAR of almost 1. And these houses are extremely box-like. They have a flat roof. They're really not consistent with the style that's in these neighborhoods. And people are really getting very upset. That's why we are proposing a zoning bylaw amendment, T5 NH. And it doesn't actually change the dimensional table for T5. If you go down a little bit, Devin, to the table, a little bit further, there you go, right there. I don't know if you can make it a little bigger. Yeah, great. The table stays the same. The height stays the same, 35 feet, but instead of allowing 3 stories, they're going to allow 2.5 stories. And what this does is, it means that the house is not going to be as overwhelming in appearance. So if a house is 2.5 stories, and you also, this zoning bylaw talks about the massing that's allowed, so that the house can only be 50% of the depth of the lot. And you measure the depth of the lot from the very front of the lot to the rear of the lot. You still do have the front yard setback, side yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, but this says that the house cannot be greater than 50% in its depth on the lot. We've also are suggesting that, for now at least, that these should be peaked roofs, or a hip roof, a gable or hip roof, and not a flat roof, and not a mansard gambrel roof. What was happening is we were getting a lot of proposals with gambrel roofs where they were kind of fake gambrels. They just, the sides came straight down and they didn't curve like they were supposed to. So this is supposed to be a stopgap measure. We don't see this as the be all and end all, or what should remain as the zoning, but we see it as putting a stop on some of these demolitions. And as a matter of fact, I'm sure a lot of you know that once the ad goes in the paper for the planning board public hearing, the zoning actually applies to any property that does not yet have a special permit or a building permit. And it has already had several properties and owners of properties decide not to demolish their properties, whereas that was what they originally proposed, and rather to renovate the properties. One of them is at 116 Columbia Street, where they were going to just completely demolish it. Now they're going to change the roof line. They're meeting all the requirements. We also have requirements. If you go down, you can see that we have requirements about dormer specifications. If you can go down quite a bit. Right now, yes, there you go. The dormers cannot have flat roofs themselves. They can only have a certain width. They have to be positioned on the roof in a certain way that they're not just taking up the whole roof line. Now, I will say that the percentages that we have proposed in this zoning amendment are fairly restrictive. And we did that because we know that during this process of all these different committees meeting on this and more information coming up, that it may be that you want the depth of a property to be 60% from the front to back. Or perhaps you want the third floor to be not just 40% of the floor below it, but 50% of the floor below it. And those things would be allowed, those revisions would be allowed because it's between what the zoning bylaw says and what's allowed now. So we're hoping that during this process and examining this and further analyzing this, there can also be some revisions to those numbers. So with that, I will stop and I'll be happy to take any questions that the board has.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm very happy to see this. Because to me, what you're doing is taking sort of a mini step towards form-based zoning.
Right.
In this area with the dormer. And I think it's a wonderful illustration to people who are, they're mystified by what we're talking about doing on Harvard Street, to look at this drawing and understand the impact that it has and that form-based zoning has. You talked about massing, you talked about the slope of a roof and so forth. And you didn't say how many rooms could be under that roof. This is great as far as I'm concerned. It is, however, a stopgap, and I think you're not going to be surprised to hear me say that what I'm hoping for is that we'll go all the way through the process of form-based zoning, not just on Harvard Street, but town-wide, recognizing that's going to take some time. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. And I have just a legitimate question. I'm trying to kind of place this within all the warrant articles about demolition delay and our ongoing discussion about affordable housing. And so I understand that, the goal is to keep demolition from happening, to really, I think, support form-based zoning. I just want to understand that this is not going to increase the cost of housing. Right? We're not actually talking about people demolishing houses and then building more living, like more units, right? I just want to be super clear on that.
Yes,
This is not an area where that's happening. They're just building bigger houses for themselves.
Or to sell.
Or to sell, right? But
Right,
okay.
that's correct.
Okay.
So it is a two-family neighborhood, right? There have been some suggestions, maybe we should allow a third unit, and maybe that's something we look at in the future. But right now, that would be fairly controversial issue, and I think that we need a lot more public input. But actually, what this does is makes the housing less expensive, because instead of in a 3-story flat roofed house, maximizing all of the FAR, you have huge units that are being sold for millions of dollars. Whereas here, if you're renovating, and by the fact that you are controlling the massing of the building, those units are going to be smaller.
Okay, thank you.
So there's the best example of this is across the street from 160 Aspinwall Avenue. There is a new building it's a 2-family condo. It replaced the 2-family home that was torn down. It is a box with a flat roof. And this kind of thing, pardon?
The notorious building.
The notorious building. And I'm sorry for the.
I keep track of how many times this building is mentioned a week.
Right. And I do apologize to the poor folks who bought this, but certainly not to the developer who designed this thing. And the units were sold at a much higher price than the two-family would have sold for. That's the kind of thing that this will combat.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's very
And I
And I
do
would
hope,
point out that was able to go in without any relief. The planning board never saw it.
Yeah.
When you go by it, it looks essentially like an apartment building with 6 units, but it only has 2 units.
that's two, right. And I certainly do hope that, although I doubt it, that Marty Rosenthal is listening to this discussion about form-based zoning and the impact, that positive impact, that this little bit of it will have on his neighborhood.
Thank you very much. Very helpful, everybody.
Okay, this is a public hearing unless any other comments from the select board. You want to open the public hearing, Devin?
Yes, one person has signed up. Regina Frawley requested to make a public comment, but it doesn't appear that she is with us in the attendee list. I see another hand raised. I'm going to promote Nancy Heller. Nancy, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable. Your 3 minutes will begin.
Thank you, Devin. And thank you to the select board and to the planning department. I'm Nancy Heller, town meeting member, precinct 8. I was one of the co-petitioners of Article 12 in the last round of town meeting, very successfully. And that resolution asked the planning board to come up with some ways to reduce the epidemic of demolitions that's happening in precincts 8 and 9 and other areas in Brookline, not just us, but other areas as well. The planning board has responded. We had some meetings with them, the petitioners, the group of people I was working with on this. Sean Lynn Jones was the co-petitioner, by the way. He unable to be here, he's traveling now, but and this is a terrific start to what we had envisioned. And I'm especially pleased that it will save the properties. It will save units that they may cost a little more than they do now, but they certainly will not cost as much as those big boxy things, which are huge with elevators and garages and every luxury you can think of. By the way, I just want to give you a little bit of an anecdote about the place on Aspinwall, which Mike Sandman referenced. It's actually 159 Aspinwall, and it's, I think, somewhat sarcastically called the storage unit building on Aspinwall Avenue. So you can see how, and I have not met a single person who actually likes the way that building looks or fits into the neighborhood or what it's done at all. But anyway, at any rate, I want to thank Polly and Maria and Kara for working on this and coming up with a solution. And I'm hoping it's successful, as Polly has given you examples of how it has worked to date. It's so early. And excuse me. And if it does, I'm hoping that we can bring it especially to other T5 neighborhoods, which are also under siege, like the neighborhood around Aspinwall Avenue. So thank you very much for letting me speak. And we fully support this effort.
The next person signed up for public comment is Regina Frawley. Regina, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable, and your 3 minutes will begin.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, wow. It's the first time in a while that it has worked. I just had a question for Polly, but she may have implicated the answer already. One of the problems with height, as Polly knows, is a lot of the apparatuses are put on the roof, and they're euphemistically called penthouses. Would that be restricted by the 2.5 height, which I applaud? I really applaud this whole warrant article, but could you answer that specific question? Would there be an allowance? It often is up to 8 or 9 feet in order to cover the appliances to go on the roof, like the air conditioning, the heaters, all that kind of stuff is often now put on top of the roof. Could you please answer that? Thank you very
Sure.
much.
Well, the zoning bylaw does allow certain equipment to go on the roof. And it can be approximately 10 feet higher than what the height maximum is allowed. But typically on a two-family, you really don't have a lot of that kind of equipment. You usually have that more, on apartment buildings. Now, an elevator penthouse would be allowed, but stairs going up to a roof deck would not necessarily be allowed to go up to 10 feet.
Thank you.
There is another public comment request. I'm promoting Edward Dumas. Edward, you've been promoted to a panelist. You can unmute and share your video if you're comfortable. Your 3 minutes will begin.
Thank you. So I do appreciate the planning department's work on this and am very supportive of this change. I guess the question that I have around it, though, is a little bit trying to gain comfort that this solves the problem that we believe it will solve in terms of the demolition and the construction of the homes that we feel really don't fit within the character of the neighborhood. And I'm asking it because the districts that we're talking about are currently part of the Coolidge Corner Design Overlay District. And so the kind of demolitions that are being discussed, fall within the requirement of a special permit and therefore design review. And so when I read 5.09 of the zoning bylaws and read what the design review entails, this is the subpart 4 and then section, I guess, paragraph C of that. The description of what would be required in terms of the relation of the building to the streetscape, the language in there suggests that this, first of all, is perfectly consistent. So the language that Polly discussed would, in my read of it, be very consistent with what's stated here. So in that sense, it does make this design review more objective if it is thought to comply with the fulfillment of these requirements. But the question that I have is, this would seem as a plain read to already preclude this type of development in the Coolidge Corner Design District. So the question kind of goes, how are we getting these homes given they're supposed to be already subject to this sort of thing? And I don't see evidence from the planning department in terms of the completion of the design review that they're approving these things as compliant. There's a possibility that there's waivers that are happening down the approval line. And if the waivers are going to take place regardless of this change, does that solve the problem? The other thing that also I feel might be a little more alarming is that when I looked at the records of some of the homes in terms of the building permits, I was not able to find that the planning department conducted design reviews on homes that had been fully demolished and then big square boxes were built. So it wasn't clear to me that that's a breakdown where the building department might be rendering approvals without subjecting the developments to the special review. And the
You have
case in
30
point,
seconds.
so the case in point on that one was 116 Thorndike, which was scheduled for further demolition, had a building permit that was taking the process all the way through, went to the preservation committee, had a 1-year delay. The 1-year delay was up. They were just about ready to do the full demo when Polly learned about this and contacted the developer and said, a special permit is needed. And that really is when they stopped that exercise. So it's, again, I know I
You've reached 3
rattled a lot,
minutes.
but I just hope, again, this solves the problem. It's not clear to me that it will, but I approve. I'm very supportive of what Polly intends. Thank you.
Do you want me to answer
Yes.
any of those questions? So you know, it's true that all departments sometimes miss things, but that was caught and they were told that they needed a special permit. But the difficulty is that the planning board and the Board of Appeals have to look at what's allowed. And so if you're allowed to build a 3-story building, or you're allowed to go up to an FAR 1, or if you're allowed to build a very, very long building on a lot, yes, they do try to make the developer make changes so that it's more consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. But there aren't any very specific design standards. They're very general. And so just having these design standards within this new zoning really will help that and will help the boards ensure that these buildings are not out of place.
Okay, thank you.
There is a comment in the Q&A that says Polly and the planning department have put in an enormous amount of thought into this. However, these planning efforts are only as good as the town's zoning enforcement. What is the town doing to strengthen zoning enforcement if developers take liberties after the building permit is issued?
Well, I don't think, I'm not in enforcement, so I can't answer that.
I will say that, you know, we have a robust enforcement team, you know, but I also will also say that as a community of 60,000 people where a lot of construction is going on, one of the things that we do rely on, in addition to that, in addition to regular inspections and requirements for the various organizations, is that we do take reports that come in from the public very seriously. You know, we rely obviously on that combination of regular inspections that are conducted on a regular basis. Both prior to the beginning of construction and mid-construction and then at the end of construction. But also we take, you know, if members of the public have concerns about things that are going on in the community, strongly encourage you to make those reports so that we can evaluate those as they come in.
Nancy Heller is raising her hand. Do you want her to get a second public comment?
Sure.
Thank you for hearing me again. On the subject that Ed Dumas is raising about the 116 Thorndike, I think in that case is an example of a developer who may not have been as savvy as some of the other developers in town, either from it may have been willful, it may have been just ignorance, but I'm not sure that he was as pursuing the kinds of permits that he needed. And it brings me to the question of, could we have some sort of checklist in the building department and the enforcement departments that would answer the question of what is needed at a particular time, so that the building the process of going through the building and issuing a building permit, they're checking all the boxes and making sure that, you know, the building permit in this case shouldn't have been issued. It should have been waited for the design review, and that didn't happen. So, you know, there must be some way to prevent.
There is, Nancy. We have a electronic permitting system, and it won't let them issue the building permit unless everything is, you know, been met, is supposed to have been met. In this particular case, for some reason on this particular property, it was not designated the way it should be. And I know that the Preservation Commission and Building Department have worked together to go over those lists and make sure that they're up to date.
Okay, well, I just hope, you know, I hope this is a one mistake and not repeated around the town, because that could be a problem. I can understand one mistake, but it'd be hard to understand many.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Any other public comments? Let's close the hearing. Polly, I'd like to ask a question. This afternoon, I received a letter from RC Law, Bobby Allen and Jennifer DePazzo, which included a bunch of critiques of this warrant article. Have you had a chance to read it?
I got it late.
Okay.
late
I,
yesterday.
I have not reviewed it closely, but I just noticed that they do have some comments regarding questions about roof types that are required in the warrant article, which were issues that were raised last night at the Land Use, Zoning, and Sustainability Subcommittee. Do you have any response or comments on those?
Well, I know that I have a meeting with my staff tomorrow to go over that letter and see if we can provide answers to it. There has been some feeling that we shouldn't prescribe roof types. But then there are other people who feel that as an intermediate step, prescribing, forbidding flat roofs is a good idea. It doesn't mean it will always be like that. But we will be going over that letter and responding to it, but I just got it late last night and I haven't had time.
Could you make sure that the select board receives a copy of your responses?
Sure, I'd
Okay,
be happy
thank
to.
you. Any other discussion or questions? Okay, thank you. Our next item is, if I can find my agenda, cannabis equity policy. A review and possible vote on a cannabis equity policy, which is in our packet. Who's going to on that?
I'll take that.
Oh,
one,
Mike.
Yeah.
Okay.
So hold on a second. I need to open it myself.
I would just say, I remember this because I think I wrote the very first draft.
And in
Okay.
fact, I actually don't have
After our discussion, we'll see if you're proud of that.
We
Dreadful.
discussed it before, went back.
I
to
can-
I know.
Okay, so this
I
is
guess
the,
I know the answer to that.
sorry.
Sorry.
This is the product of the original draft of the cannabis equity, so the cannabis, social equity policy as it relates to cannabis. And there was some discussion on the Cannabis Mitigation Advisory Committee about making some changes, and ultimately Bruce Levin and Danelle O'Neill got together and made two very sensible changes. And I think as it's presented to you now, it's ready for prime time, and I hope that it will be enacted. And I will also say that at the same time, there was discussion back and forth with the attorneys who represent the various operators of retail marijuana establishments to finish up on any discussion that we might have about the fee structure. I think I made it clear to the Cannabis Mitigation Advisory Committee that was the select board's responsibility. And so they did not offer any advice on that particular topic.
I sent you the draft. Okay, any discussion?
I'm proud of what we.
I guess I have a question for town council. The targeted applicants are economic empowerment status or social equity status applicants, which is not a racial category as such, but I'm wondering if there's an issue with respect to item 3 here, where the town will exclusively accept and consider applications from those categories of applicants for 3 years. I mean, does that raise any litigation risk by whoever?
So Joe Callahan, Town Council. Unfortunately, cannabis is the area that I'm least familiar with, and Jonathan Simpson and John Mareschi in my office are more the experts in it.
Yeah.
I do know that there's an issue with this policy in the pending cases before the Supreme Court regarding college admissions. Harvard, you might be familiar with the Harvard case and the North Carolina admissions cases. So there's an expectation that all this analysis under equal protection and preferences. The law is very complex today, but by the end of June, it might be completely different. So I don't think that's a problem now, but it may be a problem in July.
Okay.
We should worry about it in July.
Oh, that's,
Mm.
you're right.
Well, that was in the original, and that was in the original draft
Right.
that we had. My understanding is that is the way the state's policy runs, and that's in fact
Yeah.
what we extracted for this.
Right. Its
Mm.
question is, will that survive?
Yeah,
And I
well,
think
that's
the other thing that is in this new language in 3 about to the extent allowed by law, preference will be given to applicants who reside in the town of Brookline. You may remember that Maine recently lost a big case about this at the First Circuit, where they put a lot of requirements in place that, you know, it had to be 50 operated had to be 51% owned by people who physically lived in the state of Maine. First Circuit struck that down as violating the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. So I think it is the caveat to the extent allowed by law is important here.
That's
Okay.
Um,
So both with respect to residency, but also with respect to accepting applications. Okay, that's
right. But as Miriam has been and town council pointed out, this is we're thinking it. We'll know the way the field settles in June.
Yep.
Well, we know how it's going to settle.
Well, not necessarily.
The question is, how bad is it going to be?
Yeah.
Right.
That's the better way to put it.
and what it applies to, you know,
Yeah.
whether it can be stretched over this. Any other discussion, John?
I'm just wondering, because this is very specific, that the purpose here is that for any available marijuana establishment license in any category, the town will exclusively accept and consider applications for 3 years. And equity applicants for 3 years. What happens if there are no retail licenses that become available during that 3-year period?
Then that's the.
I did ask Joe.
That's the deal.
I did ask
Yeah.
Joe, and he was about to get up and answer.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
That's
you-
okay. No.
That's. I'll let the expert answer, but.
And maybe he's going to turn it over to you. I don't know.
I doubt it.
I'm happy to answer the question. I'm happy to defer to someone else, but I'm sorry. If I understand the question, it's if the ballot question in May passes, limiting it to 4. I'm sorry, let's start off. You adopt this policy tonight and the ballot question on May 2nd, question 3 passes.
Doesn't matter. Maybe.
I didn't mention the ballot question. I'm just talking about if there's no available licenses to be handed out to equity applicants
Or nobody.
for 3 years. Well, no, I'm thinking more in terms of there's none to hand out. So we've had an equity policy,
Right.
but it's been meaningless because we have no licenses to hand out to equity applicants. What happens then?
But you do now, okay? Because of the additional alcohol license that you provided to Gitter,
Yeah,
there's now a possibility for a 5th retail license.
but that might not last.
Correct.
right?
That's
Yeah.
why I assumed you were talking about
Yeah.
with the ballot.
Yeah.
question, Okay.
But you
So-
also, I'm sorry. You also.
Let-
might have
let him
so-
finish.
Social consumption.
Right.
So there were other.
Could I ask as a favor that, if I want an answer from the town council, could I get an answer from the town council? No, there's a reason to want.
Okay, settle down, kids.
Gosh.
Fair enough.
Let's have
Yeah.
some order here in this classroom.
Thank you.
But Mike was doing a better job answering. questions.
Well,
Struggling.
I won't dispute that. I just, I would like to have the answer of our town council.
Okay. But we have an available license now, which was the impetus of why there should be a social equity policy now. We were concerned that if an applicant came forward, applicants might not be coming forward because they might be waiting for the results of the election.
Yeah.
too. But if an applicant came forward now, what would you do? So that's why we've been trying to push to have the social equity policy in place for April until May.
Yeah.
And then deal with the election results after that.
Yeah.
But your question, if I understand it correctly, is if we don't have a license available.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then we don't have a license available to give it to anybody. Social equity applicant or under the old process. There's just no license available. We turn them away.
But would we simply extend the policy for another 3 years at the end of 3 years? I'm just curious about that 3-year, limitation on it.
I think the idea was to come back and revisit this.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on in the industry. We talked earlier about a lot going on, with equal protection analysis. I think it's probably a good idea to have kind of, not sunset provisions, but look back periods. You don't pass a policy and forget about it. You heard the director of HR. We're going through policy reviews. One I came across has Rich Kelleher's name on it. So how old is that policy? We should be looking at things periodically.
I wonder if there's anyone at the table or in the room that can answer this question. My recollection is we have an applicant who was licensed but has not yet opened their establishment. Is that still
Still the case.
Still the case? Yeah.
No.
Do they have a limitation on how long they can hold that license without opening the?
No, I mean, you can revisit the license, every year there's a license renewal. And if there's someone who's holding the license but not opening the business, there's an argument to be made that that's not someone who's making the highest and best use of a license. In my last conversation with that licensee, they said they were planning to open soon.
Been saying that for a long time. Yeah.
Soon
Okay.
can mean anything.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, by the way, before you go, I have a suggestion. First paragraph, purpose. I mean, I was surprised that, the purpose is to, quote, further the public interest by encouraging diversity, whatever that means. I would think that we'd want to refer to the statute that specifies what that public interest is, and that is to mitigate the impact of criminalization of marijuana on mainly Black and brown communities. And there's language in the statute that probably would go better here and be more and be clearer.
So I'll tell you that I know that at a prior version, that language was in here. So at some point it was taken.
Okay, so maybe the question is why? Was there a legal reason?
I don't think it was taken out by. No,
No?
I think it was I presented this or a version of this to the select board before Mike was a select board member. And I think at that time, that language was taken out. I don't remember the details of the
Okay.
discussion.
Would anyone object to putting it back in?
I'd be more than happy to
Okay.
put back in.
Unless there are issues with doing that.
I have no idea. I would have
Can you
that level of
repeat what
detail.
we're
I do
putting
not
back
know.
in?
It's language out of the statute, and I don't know exactly what it or exactly how it's phrased, but it's basically saying that the reason for this legislation is to sort of address the impact of criminalization of marijuana on I don't know what the language I use, but in Black and brown communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's explicit language.
This goes back to it's the bill, I think it was in last July that passed to change the rules on there were a whole series of changes. But I think it's a really good idea actually to put it back in. Had it been in here, I certainly wouldn't have taken it out. Would not have taken it out.
Yeah.
But we don't have it in front of us.
No.
We don't have it in front of us. It's true.
We can always make these edits. We can with your feedback and you tell us on staff what you
I'll
want in
tell you
here.
where it is easily locatable. This is right before I handed over the reins, Mike, we rewrote the charge for the cannabis commission or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And we put that language in the charge.
Oh, let's see if we can find it then.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll talk to you. We'll pull it out
Okay.
and we'll bring it back before you next week.
So
And I'll tell you, I mean, I have not a selfish, but a particular reason for wanting that, in that, too often people come to us and talk about diversity in their businesses. And this has come up in hearings, and they say our BIPOC population is X. And it turns out that doesn't have anything to do with Black and brown, employees. And I think it's
Here it is.
Important to
Yep.
just make clear that, we're not talking about some vague category.
So in the committee charge, the committee shall consider and make recommendations on the expenditure of community impact funds in accordance with MGL Chapter 94G, paragraph 3D on topics including and so forth. So I believe that that's the statute that is that should be inserted, and I'm perfectly happy to insert that at this point. And if you'll take
Okay,
the
but
motion.
a reference to the statute or the language
A reference to the statute. That is, if you're looking for a reference to the statute, that is the statute.
So the actual quoting from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission under statute 2017 C55, an act to ensure safe access to marijuana, the Cannabis Control Commission is required to ensure that people from communities that have been disproportionately harmed by marijuana law enforcement are included in the new legal marijuana industry. These programs were developed in response to evidence which demonstrates that certain populations, particularly Blacks and Latinos, have been disproportionately impacted by high rates of arrest and incarceration for marijuana and other drug crimes as a result of state federal drug policy. Criminalization has had long-term ill effects, not only on the individuals arrested and incarcerated, but of their families and communities.
That's a lot to put in the policy.
Just cut and paste.
Yeah. So I guess what I'd like to vote on, I mean, and I think we probably should vote tonight,
Yeah.
is the policy with the changes we talked about, and leave it to Chaz to sort of edit, that language, or someone to edit that language so that it's
Great.
it fits into the policy without too much wording. John.
But isn't the same thing accomplished by the fact that the policy is limited to individuals or entities that have received one of the following: CCC, economic empowerment status, or CCC, social equity status?
No, I think those.
Doesn't that
those
define who is eligible for one of those two things?
I think that those categories are much broader than what we're talking about.
Well, then we have a conflict between the preface and what the rest of the policy says.
Hmm.
I think that probably Chaz can edit the preface to be in line with that, because I agree with you, Bernard. I think we need to be very explicit.
Yeah. And by the way, we're just talking about the purpose.
Yeah.
I think that although the categories don't exactly fit that purpose, at least we're saying that this is what we're aspiring to do.
Yep.
And that's, I think, what's important.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think these necessarily conflict. We can make this.
Yeah.
work.
Okay. Do you want to make the motion or?
Yeah, I move approval of the marijuana, unless there are any other comments. Okay. I move approval of the marijuana establishment equity policy as edited by the select board in our discussion with respect to item 3. And actually item 4, where the to extend allowed by law language is also suggested, and as edited by inclusion of language from the statute, chapter 94G, regarding purpose being to assist primarily Black and Hispanic individuals as prepared by the town administrator. Something like that. Okay.
You did that very well.
Satisfaction of the town.
It would-
We'll prepare it, but to his satisfaction.
Okay.
That would require at least another 2 hours of the advisory committee, but that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So all in favor, please indicate by saying aye. John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. So I'm looking forward to the revised version of this.
We'll get it to you.
Okay, next item on the agenda, and it's just 8:35, so we're doing really well. Of course, we started at 5, but
Can I go back to this just for a second?
sure.
I just want to make sure it's clear to the town administrator that if he hasn't already gone forward with the fee structure that we talked about with the that we're
Oh, yes,
We're-
it's in the hands of the retailers and I look forward to their response.
Okay, good, good. Thank you.
And I thank them for their patience on that. I know it took longer than we had hoped, but we are standing by for your response and we will get through it.
All righty.
Good, okay. Okay, next item is May election. Question of approving the following actions related to the May 2023 town election. And there are three actions. I think we can vote them together. First, vote to issue the warrant for the annual town election scheduled for May 2nd, 2023. Second, vote to issue the warrant for the special state primary scheduled for May 2nd, 2023. And third, vote to authorize police details for the May 2nd, 2023 elections. Any questions?
What is the state primary? Is that one of the town reps?
Precinct 16.
Precinct 16 representative
Yeah.
retiring?
Yeah, the clerk can tell you. He
Okay.
is joining us now.
Oh, cool.
How you doing, Mr. Kaufman? Explain to us the state primary.
Certainly, we have a special state election happening in precinct 16. The state representative district that includes West Roxbury and precinct 16 in Brookline was represented by Ed Coppinger, who's announced his departure from the legislature.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to be having a special state primary on May 2nd and then a special state election on May 30th. So I'll be coming back to you guys with that warrant in due time.
Okay. By the way, shouldn't item 2 reference precinct 16?
So the warrant-
This is not a warrant for all the precincts, right?
Correct. The warrant itself details that it's only an election in precinct 16. And that warrant will only be posted in precinct 16. So while the election, the warrant for the annual town election will be posted in 10 locations throughout the town, the one for the special state primary will be posted in 10 locations, all in precinct 16.
So I'd like to move approval of the 3. I'm sorry, John?
Yeah. I just want to make sure that everybody understands the context for a couple of questions that might arise when people take a look at the wording. We are dealing with all 3, right? So yeah, we're dealing with the wording of the ballot questions 1, 2, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is a difference between how the state treats state ballot questions and how the state treats local ballot questions. Frankly, I'm perplexed by it. I don't quite understand it. But of the questions that are local that are going to be on this ballot, one being the Pierce debt exclusion, 2A being the first version of the override, 2B being the second version of the override. And then there's question 3, which is the marijuana question. And of those 3, only one has a summary after the statement of the language of the question. And it turns out that if we wanted to summarize and explain anything further about question 1 or question 2A or question 2B, we're not allowed to do so. Whereas we are required to do so for question 3. It's kind of strange. And one of the results of all of that is that not only in the case of question 1, which I guarantee, and I don't have to say why, is exciting a lot of interest in the town on both sides, nothing in the language of the question will say what the dollar amount of the cost of the school project is, and nothing in the question will say what the dollar amount of the borrowing is, and there will be no summary below the language of the question that provides that information either. And there will be no summary of what the arguments are for the question and against the question. On the other hand, question 3 will have a summary, but will not have, as often will happen on the state ballot, the case made by the people in favor and the case made by the people opposed. So thankfully, there is going to be what people call a red book prepared that will fill in a lot of that absent information. And it will be mailed to all voters. Those who want to be want to refresh their knowledge of the questions before they vote on them would be well advised to bring that to the polls with them. Those who get it to the polls and then discover they don't quite understand the questions based on the very limited information that's on the ballot, there'll be copies. Ben can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. There will be limited copies of the Red Book to be shared at the polls. You know, it can be given to a voter who uses it for as long as it takes, brings it back to the table, and then it can be given to another voter. But this is not just your average election with those three very consequential ballot questions. And yet the information that will be on the actual ballot that voters fill out is, to say the least, only a very fragmentary version of the information they might want to know. And it's all because of laws that restrict us in terms of how much information we can put into questions.
Ben, you want to defend those laws?
Yeah, I'm not asking him to. Maybe
Or
Mike
explain
wants
them?
to.
No, so John is absolutely correct. The state fairly stringently guides what we are and are not allowed to include on the ballot. So for things like an operating override or a debt exclusion override, we have to use very specific language that the state requires, and we are not allowed to include any summary on the ballot itself. For question 3, which is the one limiting the number of marijuana shops in Brookline, the state actually requires that we include a summary from town council on the ballot, as well as the language of the bylaw that will be adopted if the question passes. Beyond that, the state doesn't allow us any flexibility to have additional information on the ballot. Adopting Section 18B, which is what town meeting did back in January, is going to allow us to send that mailing that John was describing. It'll go to every household with a registered voter. It will have information, the ballot question itself, summaries from town council, and arguments from the pro and the con. So that's going to every household, and we're going to have additional copies available in polling locations for those who need it to help bridge that gap in ways that state law don't allow us to actually include the information on the ballot.
Great, thank you.
Maybe we need a home rule petition to add to the pile that Tom is already working on to change that.
Okay. So are we ready to vote? I move approval of items 1, 2, and 3 with the understanding that item 2 refers to a state primary election only in precinct 16. All in favor? John?
Aye.
Miriam?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. And that is the end of this agenda. Anything you want to say, Chaz, or
No.
anyone else? You want to go home, right? Okay.
Look, I stayed the whole thing. I mean, I always stay the whole meeting.
We're
but I stayed
impressed.
Physically the whole meeting. But the tub leaked.